And then you just gotta wait and go,
Yeah, they're
okay,
actually-
4:10, yeah, it's gone.
Yeah, and the sun comes out and it's beautiful.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Actually, I'm reading.
Okay, we'll get started for today, our special council meeting of Friday, March the 3rd. Welcome, everybody. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and the Sinix peoples, and is home to the Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. There is one late item that is being introduced, and it is the Tramway Society request, I believe, for a letter of support. And are there any other late items? Seeing none coming from council, and what we're going to do is we're going to put that, because we have Joy Barrett on the call, if everybody's okay, I'm going to put that item right before we start 10. So it's going to be item 9.5 for the late item, as opposed to waiting till item 12.
9.5 or 7?
Well, it's going to be before we start
Okay.
the main part of the business.
9A.
So it's not going to be 12. So can I have an adoption of the agenda as amended? Thank you. Moved by Page, seconded by Tate. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody. There's no previous minutes to adopt, no previous recommendations, and so we will go right down to the late item regarding the tramway. So Joy, if you're there. Hi.
Yeah. Does everybody see and hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry for my croaky voice. I've got a really bad cold. So basically, I've been working with the Nelson Electric Tramway Society. It was determined a couple of years ago that they needed to basically entirely replace the track, like the rail beds, the spikes, etc. And this is a huge project. We're looking in the realm of about $1 million. So we were really just waiting for a large grant opportunity to come up, which it did. And in January, we put forward an expression of interest to the provincial BC Destination Development Fund program. And that's basically to kind of enhance tourism infrastructure and experiences. And it was a 2-round initiative. So basically, you got to go forward or you didn't. And we were notified that we didn't get to go forward to round 2. And the people who were going forward had about 3 to 4 weeks to put together a full project application. And then we got a phone call just, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday this past week, that said they had a bunch of people who were going forward who couldn't make their project work in the end, and they had additional money, and would we be able to put forward a full application by next Tuesday at noon? Yeah, I mean, I'm used to short deadlines, but for $1 million grant, that's like the shortest deadline I've ever had in my whole life. So we've been kind of scrambling to put forward everything. And what we're coming to you here today is basically a couple of things. We are requesting a letter of support for the project. And additionally, we're requesting cash and in-kind resources. Now, as it stands, the $1 million is actually the kind of hard cash cost that it's going to take to do the project. This is contracting through a company called Trophy Rail. And but the grant is asking for a 20% contingency. So that's an additional $200,000 on top of that. So the City of Nelson money that we'd be requesting is actually money that we might not have to use. It's going to sit in the contingency along with $100,000 from the Tramway Society. And we also think that we're going to be able to probably get the quote down a little bit more, which again would make it less likely that we're going to go into contingency. So we're also working closely with Nelson Coote Lake Tourism, who will be providing us with kind of in-kind marketing and also a $10,000 cash contribution. And so I just had a quick meeting with everybody this morning. And yeah, we basically kind of need to extend a license of occupation document, which apparently is not a problem. But ideally, if we could get a letter of support for the project, which would include mention of the cash and in-kind contribution. And in terms of timeline, they say that applicants will be notified fairly quickly, so like within a month. But you have until the end of March in 2025 to do the project. So likely work would probably not start until the end of this season. So potentially taking down some of the current infrastructure in like October, November, and then going into the next year, potentially even the next year after, to do the actual new infrastructure. That's me.
Wow. Okay, questions, councillors? Councillor Woodward, Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Joy. I was wondering about risks to the city. So if the grant came through and the projects went ahead, and then there were cost overruns and delays, and let's say we burned through that 200,000, what then?
Well, I had actually been discussing this quite extensively with Will Nixon from the Columbia Basin Trust last year. And he had kind of expressed that they would like to support this project. And that's potentially something that, we would have to fill out an application, of course, and go through all the various hoops there, which we can't do in 3 days. But I would say if there's cost overruns, that would be kind of my first port of call is the Columbia Basin Trust.
Okay, thank you very much, Joy.
Councillor Payne.
I might have missed it as I was writing down my notes, Joy, but how much cash and in-kind, or is the cash just the 200,000 contingency fund?
Well, we'd be looking for approximately $100,000 cash that would be part of the contingency fund. So again, that's not something that necessarily we do have to spend. As it stands with the budget right now, we would not be spending that. But the grant does request that you have that kind of cash on hand. And the $50,000 would basically be to kind of work on the landscaping. So after the trophy rail has come in and done the work, there's going to be some landscaping required just around the tracks, and that would really be for that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So just on that, as council's aware, the Kulo's project is going ahead, and they are going to be doing work along that stretch. Street improvements there, and Sebastian indicated that his budget was going to be including some pathway improvements. As you know now, it's kind of just a little, not a really even a formalized path along the tracks there. So that's sort of more of the type of landscaping that we were planning anyway as part of this project. So this isn't really new from our end. So just wanted to share that part.
Sorry, I'm going to go to Councillor Page first.
Thanks. Joy, as you've been working with the Tramway Society at laying out this project, the opportunities for improvement above and beyond what we currently have, and specifically thinking about that strip in front of the mall, is there starting to have, are we starting to get some vision or conversations on the long term on how we might improve upon what's already there, be it through land acquisition, be it through land use planning? Like how much are we starting to see a vision form on where this will go over the next 30 years?
Well, I mean, from last time I heard, and somebody here could probably update me on this, that the mall was being purchased by a different party than the previous owner. Does anybody know if that did happen? Okay. Well, last I heard that was kind of in the works. in which case that would have to be, you know, a lot of kind of discussions and plannings with the mall owners, the new mall owners. I totally agree that, you know, it would be good to have, you know, some beautification as well as, you know, infrastructure improvements for that section in particular, because yeah, it's definitely not pretty. So I think that would be something that we would look to pursue with the Tramway Society. They're very eager to, you know, get everything spick and span and have everything working. And I know they'd be looking to pursue that opportunity. With the city, of course, we need the city in those talks as well.
And supplemental? Well, it's a new question. Never mind. It's not supplemental.
Keep going, Councillor Page.
From an asset management perspective, what is the plan over the long term around revenue generation to, when we get another 30 years down the road, replace this set of tracks?
Well, I mean, they do quite well every year with just the tickets, definitely. I think they're going to need more work just in terms of fundraising. They have done some, you know, very successful community fundraising, but in terms of actually large scale grant writing, that's something they don't have, you know, much, if any, experience on. I mean, in an ideal world, I would love to see the tramway bring on like a part-time administrator, and that can be even somebody like 10 hours a week. Because that administrator can be the person who's out there looking for any type of funding opportunities. And when you have somebody like that, when it's not solely based on volunteers, that's when you can start to make some real progress in raising, you know, larger amounts of money. So that's where I would like to see that go. And I have talked to them about that.
Okay, thanks.
Just in terms of that, and just to be clear, this is the infrastructure on the ground. There's still a whole infrastructure that's the poles and wires that are pretty well end of life as well. So this is step one in the renewal.
Yeah.
Before I go to you, Councillor Woodward, Councillor Pinero hasn't spoken
That's
yet.
fine. Thank you.
So I apologize, I'm late to this. Well,
You're not late to the conversation. We're all hearing it for the first time right now.
yeah, but, you know, maybe conversations in the past, because I'm kind of curious to know if there's ever been a conversation about the tramway being integrated in any way towards functional transport in the city, like getting from point A to point B, like it could, you know, serve its current use, which is as a tourist attraction, and also be more of a functional thing for people that live here. And if that were a possibility, then obviously it changes everything, you know, even if that's not something that happens right away, but it's something like as a future possibility that we could use it, it goes the breadth of our city, you know, and having that being used in a different capacity than it is now, or being used sort of as well for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's been
it
discussed
makes
in the
sense.
past or not, or whatever, or if it's completely
Yeah,
out of the
it's-
question or anything, but I'm just curious.
I'll let the city manager answer that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely in the downtown waterfront plan of, you know, one of the goals was extending it back up into the downtown. You know, obviously there's a commercial railway line between that and there, and I doubt they would ever allow that type of crossing on that. But so it's definitely in the longer term planning. We have had sort of some discussions with BC Transit in the past. They certainly don't see it as public transport in the past, but that doesn't mean that may not change in the future. So yeah, those conversations have happened. They haven't really gone too far.
No, maybe it might be worth revisiting in the future, just as that infrastructure does exist for us, and we've identified how we want people, you know, out of their cars and using other things, and that is another thing. And with a couple stops or a little more frequent little more frequency of the train, it's a viable option at least part of the year, I think. So anyway, it's good to know that it's not totally out of the question, but yeah.
Councillor, I'm just going to check. Councillor Lockenberg, did you have anything?
No.
Okay, Councillor Woodward for a second time.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, I just was wondering, I know that the part of the issue with the tracks is in the parking lot, considering what's underneath there, which is fairly, well, it's not totally stable. I guess my query is, in terms of cost overruns, how are we going to get into rebuilding these tracks in that area and knowing what's underneath there for the long term? Without, yeah, because
Yeah. And that particular section, is something that we're going to have to work with the mall. It's not even necessarily part of what we're doing right now, just because of those issues that you've mentioned, Jesse. It's a little bit of a kind of like what is underneath the surface. We don't entirely know. And that's why the tramway had to actually do that patch repair, right? When it's going into the mall right there. And I know there's been kind of conversations about whose responsibility it is to kind of fix that underneath ground. And really, in reality, what we're looking to do is kind of the area from where people get on the tram down to the patch repair that was done last year, and then moving on from the mall onto the Prestige.
okay. Okay, thank you, Joy.
Any further questions, councillors? So, what I'm hearing is that we need, and Joy, you can correct me, a letter of support. And the second part of that is we need to be able to, state that we'll hold contingency, looking at 20% of 1 million, 200,000, but of that only, they asked to the city would be 100,000 because there's 100,000 from the Tramway Society to make up the full amount. And then, did I hear the number 50K? I don't have, we have nothing in front of us, Joy, here, so it's everything you're saying. So I'm just trying to summarize it so people know where we're going. And then about 50K in-kind contributions. And then what I'm hearing from the city manager in regards to that we're scheduled to do some work in that area, so, yeah, that all kind of comes out in the wash. We realize that this is a tight timeline on this. And so I guess I would be looking for from council motion.
So moved.
Councillor Page.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Woodward. All those in yeah.
Council provide the Tramway Society an in-kind donation in the amount of $50,000 for landscaping improvements, a cash contribution in the amount of $100,000, and finally, a letter of support that identifies these contributions.
Could we make that, could you make sure that you have the 100,000 there, that it's contingency?
Contingency.
Or contingency?
Yeah.
We're not giving
Yeah.
them 100,000 cash.
A contingency contribution? Okay.
Thank you.
Because they might not need it.
Totally, got it.
It's just a safeguard.
Okay.
Okay, you've heard the resolution again, so seeing no further hand shooting up for discussion, all those in favor of the motion as presented? Those opposed, and that carries. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joy, for coming in. We'll look forward to some updates, and once again, you prove what I tell everybody, and I'm sure the rest of the council does, is that we have this grant writing team that, I don't know, stays up all night, or
Super duper.
I don't know
Or
what
all
you do, but
weekend
you're very
in this
good at what you're very good at what you do, and the city and the residents of Nelson thank you for it.
Right. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.
And before Joy goes, this next project, the Hall Street Pier, Joy, was the one that broke the grant, I think, in the first place, the CBT.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all your work, Joy.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, see ya. Get better.
Thanks.
Thank you for not coming in. I love those people that stay home. Okay, moving on to the next item we have before us. The Hall Street plan, and what have I got here that I can read so everybody knows what's going on? As a follow-up to the Hall Street Pier project presentation made at the February 14th regular council meeting, staff have prepared a business plan for funding the canopy portion of the project. The business plan outlines potential sources of revenue that could be generated from the amenity through event fees and parking. So, city manager, are you or Chris?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mayor, Council. Yeah, at that last meeting, we were directed to put together a business plan for the canopy, so you should have that with you, as well as something that Matt Stanley prepared, which was a sort of a cost-benefit matrix summarizing some of those decisions there as far as, build the canopy. There's an option B for a modified canopy, option C, and option D. Option C was not the metal canopy, but a sail type structure. Then he also provided a few sort of renderings and pictures there of what the pier would look like with the modified canopy, without the canopy, things like that. So hopefully you had that and maybe had an opportunity to peruse it a little bit.
Chris, maybe I'll just add on the sale option. We did talk to him about that, and the feeling was, well, they did explore using wood, a wood structure, which was more expensive than the metal fabric, or the metal that's been already designed for that. So really you'd be looking at, the roof structure instead of being whatever wood being, would be the sail. So anyway, that's kind of the approach he thought. They couldn't price it at this stage, but probably that seal structure is already designed for it, and you would be, that would be sort of the difference, is to, use a different roof structure as opposed to, but the rest of the infrastructure would likely be the same.
Mayor, if I may, just on that,
Sure.
just to understand, Kevin, what you're saying is that the footings that are there now with a similar skeleton or similar frame as is planned, and then the sail would just sort of complete it in terms of the
Right.
roof and stuff like that. So that would be okay.
Yeah, and they would obviously have to do redesign, because he said the roof is part of the structural,
Right.
the structure for the the columns. So if you don't have the roof to hold it together, you can't just have sails to hold it together. You would need to
You need to
tie the two together somehow.
Councillor Payne?
Sorry, I'm just a little confused. You just said there doesn't need to be redesigned, but on here, or there does need to be redesigned, but on here it says there doesn't need to be redesigned.
On
Is that
option
correct?
C?
On option C, project management does not require redesign by consultants. Requires architectural, structural, and electrical redesign. So
Right.
I guess I don't understand what's the difference between does not require redesign by consultants. What am I missing there?
He's talking about the architect, so the design.
The architect doesn't need to come in and do anything. It's just
'Cause we'd
the
use this-
electrical.
No,
No.
it's more structural.
Okay, so the things that Rick was just talking about going
Yeah,
up to hold.
how
the
does it hold up?
Thank you.
Without a roof on top of it is what would have to be redesigned.
Architectural, structural, and electrical. Okay,
And then electrical and, right, I think the roof
yeah,
has electrical in it, et cetera,
yep,
so.
yep. Okay,
that's the
thank you.
redesign, yeah.
Just wanted to make sure I had clarity on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So then as far as a business plan, we just kind of went in and looked at, okay, what are some sort of similar, what are some other municipalities charging for events, weddings, that type of thing? How many could we realistically have? We do about 8 to 12 weddings now in the city, depends, obviously much fewer during COVID. We already have 7, I think, booked for 2023. Not all at the Pier, various locations. Our fees are quite low, so this might lead to, and something that's kind of been on the, our plans for a while is to kind of revisit what we charge for facility rentals. You can book the barbecue at lakeside for $30, and that's not even covering Public Works to come and clean the garbage cans out. So, we probably need to revisit that whole piece, and this might just be the catalyst that's needed to do some of that work. But so we kind of looked at what would be a realistic amount that we could have down there for those types of events, keeping in mind would you want this to be something that's constantly being booked out? There's got to be some balance there, and having it primarily be an open space, if that's the direction council wanted to go, rather than something that's always being booked out, right? And then just looked at some other, what we charge for the night market, how many tents could we get down there if we wanted to do those types of events. So, if you had 3 to 5 of those kinds of events plus 8 weddings or something like that, kind of what your revenue stream would be from that piece. Then the parking is another interesting one. So that lot down there has 47 stalls. It's very underutilized, both likely the number of cars that are just there and the amount that are actually using the pay station. We generated, I think, about $8,500 in revenue from that in 2021. I didn't use 2022 because it's been closed for a lot of the year with the Pier project going on. So we looked at sort of 2021. It hasn't even been around that long to have a really good history, but the numbers are quite low. And so, having something down there that could bring folks in might, generate a lot more activity down there, not on a long-term basis, but folks just parking kind of on a daily basis. So we looked at, if you had 6 days a week of 6 hours and 40% capacity, sort of what kind of revenue that would generate. And then from that, you kind of get a total revenue. And we looked at 3 scenarios too, kind of what would be expected, what would be sort of on the high end, at 125% of that, and on a low end, which would be kind of 75% of that. And then we, taking a look at those annual revenues and then saying, okay, we're going to amortize this full canopy over a 20-year life. Likely it would last longer than that, but just kind of looking at a reasonable range and sort of seeing, okay, this is the net cost or net surplus or revenue that could be generated from this asset. There's a line in green there. Then there's just one below in blue, just to see the difference if that option B of the modified canopy were chosen, which would be $200,000 less, so $10,000 a year more, that or less cost, I guess you could say, that would be coming into our downtown waterfront reserve to sort of pay for that facility.
Councillor Woodward.
Do we need to move to get into discussion?
We could have a motion on the floor for a discussion.
Okay, I'll move.
Okay. And is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Page.
I don't know why I'm having a hard time today. What did we just move?
We moved the agenda item.
The resolution. So just so everybody understands, and I just wanted to bring back up, is that 2 things. So that was just moved and seconded for the recommendation that council direct staff to include in the capital budget $861,244 in the 2023 for the canopy portion of the City Pier project. So that's been moved and seconded just to make discussion so that we stay streamlined on what we're discussing. I just please want to note that Councillor Tate, because there is the potential for perceived bias, she did not announce the reason she left the room, which she needed to, but she's new. So I'll remind her that just because you did it once, you need to do it every time. But I suddenly went like, where did she go to? And then I went, oh, right, I was like, where did she go to? She just disappeared suddenly.
Okay.
So, just so for anybody that's watching or whatever, or listening, please note that Councillor Tate does have a perceived conflict of interest and has removed herself from any and all discussions regarding this agenda item. So there we go. Now I've said my piece. So back to
Thank you.
any
I'm back.
further discussion or debate. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm curious to know, first of all, I want to say thank you for developing this and putting a bunch of thought and, kind of figuring what we can do. Thank you for that. I know it was really a quick turnaround, so really appreciate that. My question is, was there any discussion with the Prestige in terms of, because this is going to be right next door to their business, and I'm wondering if, if they would have usage, like if they had a wedding at their, or their business, and the folks of the wedding want to go have a little shindig on the deck or on the pier, would there be a cost structure in there?
They would lease it
They
just
would
like
have to lease it just like
anybody
anybody
else.
else, yeah. So it's not, just because it's right next to them, they don't get it suddenly for free.
Okay. So,
Yeah, they'd book a time and say, yeah, we're
Yeah,
having a
They'd
wedding
have
on
to
this
book-
weekend, so
Okay.
we're arranging it, it's, and pay us the fee.
okay,
And I think the other thing with the Prestige, they could potentially have two weddings at the same time now
right,
with this, right? Indoor one and outdoor one, and
okay. Because it'll be
And
quite a
it-
feature for them.
yeah,
Right
and
next
it
door.
likely, commercial properties are assessed based on, how successful they are, so likely if room rentals and all those things went up, their assessment would go up as well, so there would likely be additional taxation on the property itself if it's more successful because of the amenity beside it. Even if they didn't book it and they got, they started seeing more people booking their hotel and using their restaurant and all those things, that would all ultimately raise their property tax assessments as well. So we didn't factor any of that type of thing in.
Okay, thank you. So that kind of, that's all been kind of worked into to this.
Right.
Okay. Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
further questions, Councillor Lockenberg?
Not so much a question, but a comment. I feel that I echo Councillor Woodward's appreciation for the business plan. And, I did have at first glance some questions about it, but I thought the assumptions, when I started teasing them out on my own, they start to seem reasonable. I don't feel like this was overly optimistic, or you're trying to sort of put your thumb on the scale in terms of getting this project through at all. It seemed,
Yeah.
this seemed doable, actually quite doable. And I was pleased to see, even in the mid scenario, which feels very reasonable as well, that it does come out to a net. I guess my question, and then I have other comments which I can wait on, but my question would be related to the lifespan of the canopy. So we're amortizing this over 20 years, which seems realistic. But this is more like a 40, 50-year asset, right? Like, we're not talking 20 years. Yeah. And so including the sort of the maintenance of this asset, it's like, is there anything to maintain? Like, I imagine we'd probably have to, given it's wood, maybe retreat the wood on a
Yeah, I think
basis.
they would use wood that would weather, and
Okay.
that you're not looking at treating it much like, yeah. I think that's the idea. They let the wood weather, as you can see on the current pier. It's not like we went down there and stained that every year. You just allow it to weather.
Right. So then what you're saying is, on the cost side, there really is no additional maintenance costs that I can
Well, I'm sure there'll be maintenance costs. Somebody will get graffiti on it, or somebody will,
Right.
do something. So I wouldn't say any facility we have has zero maintenance, but I think anytime you're going to have an amenity, you're going to have to do some maintenance on it. And so we're hope that this is going to be a popular amenity for our community. It's right now it's quite underutilized, and we think with that swimming area and the wider pier that it is now, it's much more usable than it. We inherited the current one from the federal government when they got rid of all their wars, so we didn't have any. We got what was built for a completely different purpose, and this has been specifically designed for a community amenity that would be used. So I wouldn't say there will be some maintenance there, and I'm sure we're doing maintenance right now. In fact, I would say we're probably doing maybe more maintenance because boards are failing and all those sorts of things. It's a safety concern, as you can see from from the fencing we have around it, and we have people docking their boats, and it wasn't a great design that we inherited, so we're hoping it'll be a less problematic.
All right, I have follow-ups, but I'll hold off.
I don't see any other, are you putting your hand up or are you just looking?
Just waving my.
Okay, you're just waving. Because
No, I
Counselor,
actually have my hand up.
oh, okay. Because Counselor Tate does that sometimes and then she's like, no, I'm just, so.
Look at my pen.
Okay, so, Counselor Pinero to you, then to Counselor Page, and then we'll come back to Counselor, Lockenberg for comment.
Okay, so I have also mostly comments, although I do want to also express it's quite impressive what you guys came up with in a short notice for a business plan. It's awesome, and I know we asked for that, so thank you. I find myself being a bit grinchy about this, and I know that I wasn't here, and I lack some of the context by which these decisions were made, and maybe the context for this vision, as it were, as a whole. But I do have concerns. I think that the business plan it makes sense and it's well articulated, and that's not the issue. I think the issue for me is that we are potentially being forced into sort of hyper monetization of public space in order to pay for something that we may or may not really need. And while this business plan, I think, is very intelligently thought out and makes sense, having to charge people and where that line lies and how we figure that out can swiftly turn this into something that like the community actually uses to something that's just booked by tourists constantly all the time and nobody gets to use it anyway. And if we're forced into that to pay for it, then I don't really see why we should pay for it. The other thing is that some of the arguments or the vision to me, and I wasn't here for this, and I apologize if we're just kind of like revisiting things that happened 5 years ago, that, it's the time has passed, and that very well could be the case, but I feel it, so I'm going to say it anyway. The city has several markets and events at the moment. None of them have a canopy, and they all seem to be doing just fine. So having a farmer's market on the pier on a nice summer day is still a thing, or even a nice fall day is still a thing. You could bring a tent. If you want to hang out there, you could bring an umbrella if you're sensitive. There's other things that do, we will use this as it stands, and just like we use other public spaces in the town, and not having that albatross over our necks that we paid $1 million for it and need to pay it off, I think is worth $1 million. And also, having just walked down there and spent 20 minutes staring at it, the four-season amenity argument seems a little bit optimistic. It's freezing down there. and I don't know that a roof over top of it with no walls and no ability to heat it is going to change that. So I would be surprised if somebody that's having a February wedding chooses to have it on that pier, regardless of what sort of roof you put on it. And lastly, if this is taking a long time, one of the arguments towards sort of not having, or against not having a roof on it, is that it doesn't meet these goals that were identified before. One of them being that it doesn't supply the vertical height to draw people down from Baker Street. It's not a visual landmark anymore. And having sat down there and looked, like this was spoken to before in the other meeting, it's beautiful down there as is. I actually quite enjoy not having something in the way. The lake is beautiful, the mountains are beautiful. If you can't see that, then you're not looking, I just feel that as it is, it's an improvement over the last dock. There's no doubt. It's a beautiful design. And to my understanding, we're out of money. Also, 500,000 or 800,000 or whatever it is a lot. This is a different thing, but you know, something like winterizing the campground costs 140 grand and we don't have money for that. That is a solution towards our winter workforce. It gives people a safety valve when they're looking for housing, if they can stay there for cheap. It's maybe might solve some of our housing issues, and it's useful all year right now, and it's 140 grand and we can't afford it apparently. So what does that say? And I know that the argument's been said that, you know, this isn't necessarily like we're going to pay for this and not pay for anything else, but I think to me, and I'm new and I'm not smart and I don't know about math, but 800 grand is 800 grand, and if you're spending it, you're not spending it somewhere else. That just makes sense to me. And like I said, I'm not the sharpest. So I think that's it. Sorry.
So if I might, just on your point regarding the campground, and sorry, I can't see anything. My glasses are filthy. It's not that we don't have money for that, and I believe the amount is $350,000 to winterize it. But whatever the amount is, it's about, we haven't as a council had a chance to discuss the merits of the campground area in terms of, is maintaining the campground as a campground the best and highest use, or should that actually be considered as property that could be potentially sold in amongst the, I don't want anybody to walk away and say this is what the plan is, in amongst all the plans that could happen with a higher and best use if housing is an issue, be that property is sold and then something of substance is built on there versus transitory housing, whether it's camping in the summer for a few people or whatever it might be. So it is not an either or for the most part. So
I didn't mean to hijack the conversation with the campground specifically. That was an example of something that, you know, I understood there was some hesitation around as far as spending, and then we've got this, you know, which is a big chunk of money.
yeah, and it's a good example. But I mean,
it's just an example. It's
yeah.
not the thing, but I appreciate that.
But we're not, and by no means, Councillor Pinero, are you uninformed or not aware or less educated than the rest of us around the table. So please know that your colleagues appreciate your comments, and we consider all of us here at the table equals. None of us are any lesser or any more informed or less informed than the others. So please be aware of that. And I appreciate your comments fully. You bring a good voice to the table. Councillor Page.
Can I make one, sorry,
Yeah.
Mayor, about comment on this? Just, I had, was thinking, and I appreciate the comments on that regarding the private and public use of the space. We could, I know Corporate Officer Winton might have some thoughts too, but the idea of coming up with a policy here on the use of our facilities, work some of those things into that, like how many days of the year would we allow this to be booked out? It wouldn't be, if there's direction from council of like, hey, we only want 1 day a month, or, once every 2 weeks in the summer or something like that, as far as when that would be available, we could definitely work that type of balance in there so that it wouldn't be a case of, hey, every time I go down there, there's a wedding going on. It would be like, no, we made a decision that it's only going to be, X number of days a year or a month or whatever. So we could do that.
Councillor Page, then Councillor Lockenberg.
Yeah, I appreciate the business case and pulling the numbers again, as everybody has said, to give some clarity as to where revenues would be generated for an amenity such as this. I did want to go back to the long-term maintenance of an amenity such as this and the asset management. So how we get to, I know we'll need to have a larger conversation over the long term on how we are going to do the asset management on all these public amenities across the board, including this one. But aside from potentially using pressure-treated wood down there, I would hope that we have a pretty robust schedule on how we're going to be treating something like this, so it is a 50-year asset. I would take note of some of our street furniture as an example of outdoor pieces and amenities, but there is clearly a need for some of that to be stained and retreated on a somewhat more regular basis, and I don't want to necessarily, I want some assurances that we're using best practice when it comes to keeping this shining and attractive, and also in the same piece, standing up to the weather that it'll be subjected to, so that we're not in a situation with the last pier, which is, could have used, I think, some more paint on a more regular basis to kind of hold it where it was. But can we get a little bit more assurance kind of after we finish this up on how that's really going to get taken care of on a 5-year cycle?
So I know Director Innes has been very involved in this project in terms of the design, and maintenance was a big part of what his lens was when he was looking at this project. So I think he would probably be the best person to, I think having him back and looking at our amenities as a whole, because you're right, whether it's the bathhouses, whether it's the, some of the other amenities we haven't put the investment in maintaining those over the years, our facilities, etc. So I think that's part of, we haven't really tackled the amenity side of the city at this stage. We traditionally, we're very fortunate with the water license reserve. That is how we've been able to maintain all those assets over time. So there is a funding stream for that, but just like everything, it gets stretched. But we can certainly have Director Innes back, and I think you're seeing on the facility side, they recommend to develop a more formal asset management plan for those, and I think we have to do the same thing for our public amenity spaces.
Yeah, and I just see it as a strong value to kind of get that up front, especially with something new, so that, it never slides into anything that becomes something we're chasing. Okay, thank you.
Where are we going next? Oh.
Oh, no, you haven't spoken, so you're kind of next.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I just want to make sure. I do agree that the concept of monetization of our public spaces is something that it's very interesting work, and I don't see anything on here that we wouldn't have done anyways. My understanding is that the fees that are charged to use any of the spaces around town, and I've applied for a few of those permits a number of times, are designed and at the moment may be too low to cover the costs of public works going, utilizing hydro on occasion for all of those things. So I'm not sure how this is different than that. We would have fees for however many days of the week we would utilize those spaces. How it would make the space more or less usable by having a wooden canopy or a sails canopy, and I am with Councillor Pinheiro. I love walking along the lakefront, but if there was a concert or a night market or whatever down there at minus, even 10 degrees, which we've seen a lot of, I would not be participating. In addition to which, I was just sort of listing here the other amenity spaces that we have, and how many events can we reasonably expect to host in our city of 11,000, 12,000, 15,000 with Cottonwood, Railtown, Hull Street, and, the Lakeside Park. So by the time you put all of those into the mix, and we do have some, Hull Street Plaza has had some really awesome, when you think of the Mural Fest. So what is the need going to be on a 4-season basis for that space? I am interested, and I've heard some ideas. None of them to me were, 12-month of the year ideas. Sorry, and there was just one other thing. So any of the amounts on here, I don't know how they would be any different having a wooden canopy than a sail canopy, or in the wintertime, no canopy. I did work at the Prestige for a number of years prior to COVID, and I do know that there's lots of weddings there. Sometimes they would have 2 weddings a week. They always manage to fit them in. It's often a time thing, and certainly being on the lake is a huge benefit. I think that will come back, but whether or not that will be a bigger draw for the Prestige in the lake, I'm not convinced. I think people going to the lake are going to be just as happy with the lake and the mountain in the background as with the wooden canopy. I think it's interesting focusing on the heritage of, wood for Nelson, and I can't remember the exact wording there. It's not my, I have an understanding of the history, but not deep and wide, so I certainly want to respect that. But I think with the Ladybird in its beautiful facility, that might be focusing on that as well. So I have not heard yet a reason that would move me to feel that we need to complete this wooden canopy at this price, which is obviously what it is, due to no circumstances other than things that were out of our control. So I haven't seen anything yet that would shift me away from looking at the huge scope of projects that we do have out there, and considering that we are a community that declared a climate emergency, committed to 100% renewable. We have a very robust climate change plan in Nelson Next. Those are all big ticket items that we don't even know what those costs are going to look like. So I don't know that, I guess that's not a question, but any of this funding that I see here would be money that would have been coming in anyways. If there's no canopy, sail canopy, or wooden canopy, I'm not sure that any of these numbers are going to change. So if we were just looking, which is what we asked you, to come in and try and find funding to pay for the more expensive canopy, I don't know that I've seen that.
Well, we did ask for a business case, and so
Yes.
this is what they've done in terms of, and the question was, in terms of potential revenue. So this is the business case. So yes, you are correct that things, we charge out for everything.
Yeah.
And this would be another structure that would have some charge outs, and this is the estimate. So this is what we asked for has come back. You feel that, and you're allowed to feel that this is gonna happen, this money's gonna be generated somewhere else in the city, no matter what. So, and that's a valid opinion. I just wanna clarify that unless I missed the meeting, the city of Nelson has never declared a climate emergency.
Pardon me.
So just,
Thank you.
just to be clear on that, do we have a very robust Nelson Next plan that we have to consider? Yes, we do, but the city of Nelson never voted to declare a climate emergency.
Wishful thinking.
So if I can just say one comment on that piece, I did try to only look at pieces that I thought would be different with a canopy down there. That's why you don't see commuter parking on here, and that's why, $500 for a canopy booking for a wedding is realistic. With no canopy, you're probably not charging that. Maybe you're charging what we currently do, which is $100 for a special event, so it's considerably less. So I tried to kind of
Okay.
have that lens on it of not saying like, hey, here's some revenues we could build anyway. It's sort of like, what's the additional revenue if we had a structure down there? So, but for sure, some of these things would probably happen with a brand new pier. Parking will likely go up a little bit, maybe not as much as I've put into here, but yeah, there's definitely some, it's difficult to to say exactly,
Yeah.
right? In
No,
any
exactly.
situation. So, yeah.
And that's, yeah, obviously, thank you for all the work you did. It's nearly impossible. How do we foresee those things? I agree. But I don't think it would be dramatically different with or without. That's my assessment of being down there for 2 years, watching these events come in and out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, because that, it wasn't, the question was, could we fund this with new revenues? It wasn't, would the canopy actually, generate, this incremental amount of revenues? It was really all the planning work that has been done to date, and that's what staff's marching orders are, trying to meet the policy goals of council. The downtown waterfront plan identified this area as that focal point to bring people down to the water. That's why this design was done, and the question from council was, could there be other revenues generated to pay for that vision? So just to be clear, it wasn't about trying to, the canopy's not been built to be a revenue generator. It's could we pay for it with new revenues? That's all we've done.
Councillor Lockenberg, followed by Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think that was my objection to this going forward. I had a number of them, and one of them was the zero sum nature to this. The investment in the canopy would be at a cost to other priorities, and so for me, the business plan was pretty critical to that. I do think it's important to sometimes monetize public spaces. I totally get the philosophy. However, I think the philosophy that I use when I consider this is the public good versus the private good, and what's that balance? And I think this canopy would have a degree of private good. Like, inevitably, there would be people that would be benefiting from this asset for entirely their own personal benefit. Not so, like, weddings is a good example of other private gatherings, and so you would want to charge for that, absolutely, as well as charging for vendors at the markets. We do that everywhere else, and I think we should rightfully continue to do that. On the public good side, I think the balance here is, the way I'm seeing this play out is, here's an asset over 50 years, especially when you put it over 50 years, does realistically pay for itself. So it's not going to be a burden on the taxpayer, which is my big concern, and it's not going to come at a cost to other priorities, especially as it coming from the downtown waterfront reserve and fitting in the context of the sustainable waterfront downtown master plan. Both of those sort of have created a structure in which these investments are kind of part of the long-term planning, like to build up the public amenities, so, or maintain and then sort of develop the public amenities so that they deliver benefits to residents primarily. And so it's not sort of drawing from other priorities, as I'm seeing it with this business plan. Without the business plan, I'd have a lot of questions. I mean, I did, and for me, it was a no-go. With this business plan, and believing this is realistic, like what I was imagining in my own mind, I actually was probably on the high side, and I was expecting, to be honest, Chris, I was thinking what we might see come back would have sort of more unrealistic expectations. So I was pleasantly surprised to see you really sort of leaned in. And when I kind of mapped out what does 10 events, private events look over just the summer season, I wasn't thinking about winter use or charging for winter use. I was like, yeah, that fits and leaves 90% of the time and the asset available for other for the community. So just on the specifics, so I did spend some time down there and really thought about viewscapes, which was really important to me, night sky protection and so on. But one thing I think I've been pretty consistent in my own mind is the need for shade. Like that amenity isn't really usable in some of those, certainly at the height of the summer, certainly for swimming and spending time down there without some sort of shade. Mm-hmm. It's just way too hot. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you could bring your own umbrellas, but it's not realistic. As opposed to if you go to Lakeside, having the shaded trees and stuff like that makes that a place you can spend a day at. Otherwise you just drop in and get out. So for me, it was the canvas sales. Like, okay, we need the canvas sales. Could we do it at a much better price is what I was imagining. And then I sort of did some of my own research on this, and I was like, oh, you know what? The canvas sales, especially given that they don't actually have a very long life. Yeah. You know, you do have to kind of replace that asset, and when you put it over 50 years, it's like, oh, great. Well, it's actually as or more expensive, and not to mention all of the other waste and stuff that goes along with a reasonably decent shaded structure. So it's like, so that kind of went out the window for me as I was dug into it. And then then I started thinking about, like, as I was like, okay, what if we go ahead and the business plan plays out for residents, especially for young people? What does this amenity look like in the summer? Like, will kids, you know, especially I have a kid who loves being at Lakeside, but then Lakeside sometimes closed because of E. coli or whatever what is it that we get down there? Not E. coli. Anyways. Yeah, basically the goose poop. And the flow through there is definitely better. And so I was thinking, yeah, okay, kids down there, it's a little more accessible for uphill. Is that realistic? And I'm like, yeah, that I could see that being a place where kids and families hang out. So it starts to, and then I think the final click for me was like, okay, I think I'm in on this, was the tramway. And the connection point, like a realistic connection point. So if you're down at Lakeside, you park at Lakeside, you have some fun at Lakeside, spend your morning on the playground around the thing, then you could jump on the tram, head down to the pier and enjoy the pier and the swimming area and hanging out there, jump back on the tram and get back to your parking down at Lakeside. It does connect those in a way that's pretty interesting and fun. And so I've really tried to keep tourists completely out of this. Like, I don't care about tourists. I think we do really well as a tourist community. This doesn't actually, to me, it's not an economic development, even though it probably would have some benefits, just as purely as an asset for an amenity for the community. It's like, yeah, okay, this is starting, I get it, more and more, where I've always struggled with this one myself. Yeah, and then finally I would say the thing that sort of has pulled me over the line on this is the night market and the idea of a night market. And then in the competition with other places, whether it be the Hall Street Plaza or Cottonwood, does this place add to the sort of the vitality of Nelson as a place for the community to get out, away off of Netflix, away from social media or whatever, and into a public space where we're gathering together? And does it actually add to it? And it's particularly valid points for both of you in terms of the would it work without it? Like, or does the canopy actually add anything? And it starts to, like, when I think about some of the best events at Hall or Cottonwood, both of them did have music. They were sheltered. There was kind of a place where you could really sort of anchor the event. And it did require something like the canopy to hold the sort of center point of that event, and then everybody could party around it. And so that, I was even kind of imagining, you know, like, you could eventually get us to a place, or we could get to a place where we have multiple events happening in the community, you know, almost like you could stop between them.
Shambhala and down in Nelson? You're gonna go from Electric Music Center to the other?
I did have a little fantasy of that. Dancing down at Lakeside or dancing down at the pier, and then something else at Lakeside at Cottonwood. But it did start to click, and I did appreciate it. And I think the Sustainable Waterfront Downtown Master Plan does create this vision that does foreshadow or foresee this kind of community that would be great for all residents. So from a resident's perspective, the fact that it pays for itself, the fact that it is delivering a lot of value to residents, I'm feeling a lot better about it than I did a couple of weeks ago, and I appreciate staff, Chris in particular, your work on helping me see that. And then I did talk to a few other people. Oh yeah, sorry, and I know this has been long, so I can just say the final thing. The grant thing, I didn't buy this notion of that the grants, that if we don't do this, we're gonna upset our reputation with grantors. I've actually had some conversations, and I did hear from people that I trust that there is something to be said for, you say you're gonna deliver something and you deliver it. There's a trust that develops over time with the granting organization. So I thought, okay, although I totally didn't dismiss that out of hand before, I get it. There's something to that as well, that you do want to try to follow through wherever you can on what you apply for.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
Counselor,
Basically.
Counselor Woodward, do you have something new, something more?
Yeah, I just want to say the thing that's really kind of brought me around was the time frame. And that's like this is a 40 to 50 year piece, and I think we have to think in those long term goals as we're doing lots of work here at this table, because we're putting into infrastructure that is not just for the next 5 or 10 years. It's lots of 20, 30, 40-year infrastructure projects. This is one of them. And really what sort of solidified this for me, well, excellent work by CFO and staff, was that this pier will be part of how Nelson is seen. So all the tourism, the photographs, the local scene, and it will become like an iconic piece, much like you see the Orange Bridge everywhere. There's going to be lots of photographs of this pier looking out over the lake and the bridge, and this kind of and that goes out in the world. So we have, I think there are a few things like that in this town that really go out in the world. Our heritage buildings, the Orange Bridge, Lakeside Park. We have these kind of iconic things. I really feel like with the full structure here, the benefits are going to be in the long term, and that's kind of how it really got me over the hump, was how does this work over the long haul, and pulling back the reins at this point, I realized, kind of you take away all of that very long term thinking and process. So yeah, I feel much more confident with your business plan, and thinking in the long term has really helped me too to understand what we're doing here. So thank you.
So councillors, I think we've all had a chance. I don't know. Does somebody need to hear from me? I mean, I have thoughts on this project, but I'm good with, well, just for me, it's been the time, that not the time spent here, but just the time, because I've gone back and so when we started the whole Hall Street redevelopment, started probably back in 2010, probably was the first of that, looking at the downtown and waterfront plan, and that Hall Street being our one street that does connect us north and south, and thankfully the CPR still lets us cross the land. But it's been a long time, and I appreciate for councillors that are new that it's, you kind of come in and you don't know where things fit. But I mean, we had phase one, I think, was back two duly terms ago, so 2011. I sat here at the table in 2014 with Kozak trying to do phase 2 of Hall Street, which was very controversial. We pushed back, we thought about stop, we thought about go. We realized that the whole thing was, we started at the top, but the problem was at the bottom in terms of the manhole covers coming off there at the highway. And then in the last council that some of us sat around the table, we, looked at the Ladybird. We solved a few of the problems that we had, like in terms of what do we do with the Ladybird and the pier and the project. And here we are today. And so, and you know what, we're gonna have other projects in the city of Nelson that are gonna take us this long. I mean, things do not happen overnight, and things like Baker Street redevelopment is gonna take multiple years. Railtown is gonna take multiple years. And I just hope as we make Nelson as best as we can, that we always do it in good faith, and that's what I'm hearing around the table right now, is that the decisions that we make, we're making in good faith. We've given them lots of thought. I don't think there's any more information we can add at this time. information is never complete. It's one of the things I always tell new counselors when they ask about decision-making. It's like, we never have 100% of the information. There's always some bit of information that we don't have, but not making a decision is often sometimes worse than making a decision. So on that note, I feel it's safe to call the question. The resolution is that council directs staff to include in the capital budget $861,224 in 2023. I don't want to add on more dots to the number. B, for the canopy portion of the city Pier project. It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And all those opposed? And would those that are opposed like to be recorded?
Yes.
And the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. If somebody could allow the opportunity for Councillor Tate to sneak back into the meeting. Thank you for that. Thank you, staff, for that. And maybe let's take.
Thank you very much. Maybe before we get into the long budget sheet, I just had a couple of, hopefully you got them as well in your piece.
RDCK?
Yeah, Councillor Woodward, you had asked at the end of the last meeting, like, how are we doing on snow removal?
Yeah,
So
how
did you
are we
get
doing?
that? Hopefully it's in there. I included a little graphic that you might be used to seeing that we did in prior years. And so I just put in how we're doing so far this year with a couple of asterisks beside it. Number one, and do you have this piece, or maybe Sarah, can you
No, we
share
have
the
it.
screen here too? It would
I
be
mean-
nice, thank you.
I don't think I have. For some reason, they didn't put it on my desk. They always forget to give the mayor all the information. So as I just finished talking about the need for information, and I'm
We
always
didn't get a
missing that.
printout, Janice, it was
Sarah,
just
can
in the
we-
Yeah,
package.
you know what? Is it?
Just,
Yep.
I have to.
Okay.
I'm the one with the computer, so it must be like Friday the 12th or something, because my system isn't working.
Darn.
But
This one's
Some days I
very,
wish that would
There we
happen.
go.
very
Thanks.
graphical. It's kind of probably easy to see. Okay, so the couple of asterisks I just want to put beside it are, one, 2023 is only up to February 18th, which is the last pay period we have in there, pay period 4. So wouldn't have included this last, dump of snow that we got out here in the last week or so. But for reference, I went back to 2021 and I drew a little line of where we were pay period 4 in 2021. So you could sort of see, okay, we're, not too far off that year, but keep in mind, there's going to be another big block of blue that
go out the door.
shows up on top of there.
Go out the door.
Thank you.
Was there anything else I wanted to caveat that with?
Look to the
Maybe
left.
that's it. Yeah.
So you're basically saying it's like we're sort of just around the same, you're figuring.
Yeah, if I was forecasting, I'd say, hey, it's looking like 2021, but there's a lot of months to go, so I maybe shouldn't say that, but just to give you an idea of sort of where things looked for the first month and a half anyway.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay. The other piece was something that I think the mayor had said that we had seen in prior years, the RDCK budget piece. Is it okay if I put that one up here?
Sure.
I believe this is the one that you had mentioned you'd seen in prior years and was interested in seeing again, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So this is from the RDCK's draft budget. This is their 2023 budget, and they're compared to their 2022, and what that would mean for the city of Nelson. So as you know, their tax requisition appears on our tax notice as well. So we collect not just for ourselves, but also for the regional district. So the draft budget showed a 4.83% increase. But I think there was a note on there, I wasn't at the presentation, but I just read the slides, that there was potentially another 2% increase that could come on top of that for some, I'm hoping
There was
Councilor
a-
Page could
So
chime in.
we went through the chair.
Thank you.
We did the budgetary process through the committee processes, through the services, set what you see in front of you at the 4.83, which largely is driven by shifts in property tax assessments to other areas. There's been huge growth in area I and area E and F, for instance. So there's that shift going on. But then once all of those were concluded, because of requests that had come before, there was another round of staff requests on new hires. So there's a new HR resource manager for HR, 3 new building inspectors. I think we've all heard the capacity issues with all that growth that's going on in the regional district of getting development permits and all the work in their development services department through in a tidy fashion. And then support in the IT department and
Payroll specialist.
a payroll specialist. That's right. With nearly 400 employees, they need more support in that. And so those requests add up to somewhere close to $1 million or 900,000 and will have to be incorporated again. So might be 2% overall, and do you know if it's 2% on Nelson's impact?
I kind of read through, and so I looked at the ones that hit that S100 general admin, and they're the HR position, systems admin, and a payroll specialist. A total of 354,000. So our share of that would be 72,500. Those are, I think, expected to come in though part way through the year. Like it wouldn't obviously have started in January, so that would be a little bit lower. But that's probably part of the big chunk of that 2%.
Well, and they'd also be split to rural admin as well.
Yeah, no. So I mean, like the city of Nelson's share of that would be the 72.5, I think. Yeah.
And the other thing, and to Director Jackman's credit, is when we were going through some of these, specifically the building inspectors, but also, I think there was a part-time parks. They've kicked off a review of their development fees and looking for places to actually capture these new roles, because obviously that's what they're doing, that's what they're driving. The people who are inducing that workload should be the ones who are carrying it with increased fees, because those fees are not reflective of the work being done. So there's places within that conversation that we expect increased revenue.
Mayor?
Yes.
It's a question for Councillor Page, probably. So just to clarify then, first of all, I hadn't considered this before, but development services at the RDCK comes out of general admin? Is that right? Is that what, am I missing that? Like,
No, there's another service that.
they have a separate
Yeah, they
separate
do.
service, which we don't contribute to. We're not a part of that service.
So they-
Which makes sense because we don't benefit. Okay. Okay, so that helps. Then, and sorry, the
All
second,
those HR jobs,
Those
3 of
are-
them, they all come out of
they're
general.
all in
admin.
general admin. Right. Okay, and
Split with rural admin though too. They don't purely come out of general admin.
No, but they do come out of general admin.
They do, yeah, there's a split there.
just not totally come out of
Just not
general admin.
totally.
Okay. And then, sorry, I was trying to follow there, but what were you talking about? The 72,000?
Sorry, when I looked through the minutes of the meeting, there were 3 new positions that were going to be added. The HR position, the systems admin, and the payroll specialist.
Yeah.
All to be charged to the S100 general admin.
Oh, okay.
And then I look at our share of that being 20.5%. And the
Of
total.
this new,
Yeah,
of the new-
of
got
those
it.
3 new salaries, 20.5% would be 72,500.
sorry, yeah, thank you for catching
And
up.
again, with the systems admin, IT is billed out to all the other services based
Right.
on users of workstations. So
Right.
then again, that cost gets recaptured across.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, and if I may,
But
Mayor-
but across, just to be clear, Councillor Page, but across all services. So
Yeah.
within
back
the
on
services that we
recreation.
belong in, so this is where it gets confusing to talk about services. Within the services that we belong to, say, for example, recreation, that the 3 of us, and you've sat at that table, you'll remember in those budget lines where it talks about like the community service, it's got a weird name to it, but that's that reflection of we use IT. So like in terms of, we know that the rec, and the example, the good example is that we had a recreation meeting and we were told after we had passed what we thought was the budget, that there was gonna be an increase to it because of the IT person. And they know that in Recreation 5, there are 30 computers scattered around wherever. And so for 30 computers worth of IT time, that's also in that bill. So while it's in general administration, yes, but then it gets also parsed out, and depending on how big a service you're in, you're paying for those other, subcontractors or whatever you might call them, the other services that you use, like IT. like payroll, they get also, you're paying for them in those other services. So if you're in a really big service, the piece that you're paying is bigger than other smaller services, right? So it's a confusing game of math.
Follow the money. And then, if I may, on that, is HR similar to that?
Yes,
So HR is charged out to the other
Yes.
services? Okay,
because HR has to do
Sure,
they have to be
yeah.
involved
It
with
would make
hiring
sense.
and payroll,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so if you got a big payroll, you got more HR cost in those line items.
yeah, yeah.
I think
And
it's
then,
community
service.
shared services is the
Yeah.
and then,
catch-all transfer mechanism.
sure. And then, so then, final question, I guess, is related to the assessments. Are you saying, did I hear you correctly saying that the assessments, there's a growth in assessments in area EFI relative to Nelson? So should we see if that's true, would we start to see that reflected in the tax requisition to Nelson residents?
It would be baked into here already,
Yeah.
but that is probably part of it, is that if you have growth in higher, in
Outside.
other areas relative to us, then the shift would occur, right?
Yeah.
If
start to
you,
see
if
some
you
shift.
go into the RDCK site, so for yourself and Councillor Woodward, who live in one of those areas, is that if you go, there's a slide there that shows, based on the assessment, which doesn't necessarily predicate that you've had more building or more growth necessarily, but your assessments have just been made higher. You're paying catch up. Like, I mean, for years, I mean, you could live on the waterfront and maybe be paying $1,000 a year for an assessment. I mean, so over time, the assessments, as the assessment authority comes through and does that, have increased. And I think it was something like, you were away. Because you've seen that slide probably in another thing, but it was something like Nelson is like 5%, but E was 11 and F was 50. I might have the 11 and the 15 backwards, but your increases are more this year just because in general, your assessments have caught up a bit. So then that has bearing because yes, you're gonna pay more tax because remember, all services versus the way we tax in the city is based on what your value per thousand is.
Just
Right.
for clarity, you're seeing 4.83% here, but the overall RDCK budget has gone up more like 11%. And so we're not seeing that full impact, and that's where that is getting picked up is in that shift to the rural areas. As property assessments rising, they're taking the greater line share of that.
Great,
Like area I is like seeing 26%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Well,
like if
just
you live in
because they've been
Silverton,
very
like
small and-
the graph was like Silverton's assessment for their 100 houses has like,
Yeah.
I don't know, gone up like 40%.
Yeah. So we should probably start to see that trend should probably continue.
Yeah,
for
well,
a couple cycles.
and hopefully it will level out once the whole province is caught up. I mean, I remember there was a time, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, that, like, I remember on my house even, it went up like 30%. It was like, okay, now we're having this big correction. They finally came to my neighborhood, and now everybody in my neighborhood's gotten the correction that they hadn't gotten to for a while, so.
Right.
And when everybody gets it, it's hard to appeal. Like if you're the Wild West and yours suddenly went up 40%, but your neighbors went down 10, I'd be phoning the assessment authority and asking them what. That's why it's always good that you can go on to BC Assessment, poke around, and see what else is going on, because sometimes there is errors, but oftentimes it's just that they finally have gotten to your area to bring you into the 21st century.
Yeah, E is 10% and F is 11.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'll understand this better in another 100 days. But what you're showing is, this is the amounts that, it's the separate line on my city tax bill.
Yes.
I have a question. Do we also have a contribution from our own, city operations or whatever, our own city budget that goes from the city to RDCK?
No, just this is the requisition they
Yeah.
send to us for us to tax the residents of
Yeah.
the city of Nelson. There isn't
Okay.
anything else. There's, they pay us for other,
Right.
they give us a contribution
Cemetery.
for our parks, for example. or
Right, but there's
things
no
that, but
block transfer
No.
of us to them?
No taxation type
Okay,
piece.
gotcha. Okay. Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you.
So anyway, so this is just a good thing to remember that that's gone up this year. So when people are talking or you see the bill, just a reminder that there are you know, these different lines that people never look at because they always just look at the bottom.
Yeah, interior health went up as another example.
Oh,
right?
yeah, and I imagine School District 8, like, we don't know what their number is, but I'm sure the school district has gone up as well. So we do have a number of line items, and that just lets you know in terms of what it is. So I've always liked this spreadsheet because it just, these are the services that we're in, so if somebody starts talking about fire out there, we're not in the fire system, and we don't run the Duhamel watershed, or the number of questions that you get asked from residents that live in E or F. Quite often they're asking you a question, but these are the services that we participate in, so that's also the list of them to have at hand. So,
Okay.
thank you for putting that together again for this
Yeah.
this year.
And maybe the last thing, just before we get again onto the long sheet of paper, I did do an update of those tax rate scenarios. I don't know if this was in there as well.
No.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, that's not a lot, except I just wanted to say I did add a couple of extra lines at the bottom, just for
Eight
what.
country.
Yeah.
Population, police.
So, and they provide a couple of the big ones that had come in, and I broke those down because that's what they do in their news releases as well, is they sort of break those pieces out to say, for Lake Country was quite substantial. 4.22% is their RCMP by hitting that next threshold, but they do have a 5.75 for inflation, as does the city of Vancouver. They also have a 3% for their Vancouver Police Department in their tax increase. So these ones with the larger increases do tend to sort of break those out to, for their awareness piece of letting the public know sort of what's driving those increases.
Terrace is a community that's not much different than we are, Chris. Do you have any idea why I don't see an asterisk next to Terrace? Just out of the curiosity of Terrace being where it is, it's just, I think they've always, Terrace and Kitimat have often been in our comparator groups.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, I just
Yeah, no.
grabbed a couple new ones that hit the news recently, and
Yeah.
they did have a breakout, so I just kind of.
I can do that, my own work on that,
Yep.
just,
The other thing on communities our size that have RCMP, they only pay 70% of policing costs, whereas we pay 100%. So when we have a increase in policing, it impacts our taxpayers more than those communities that have RCMP.
Now, moving on to our nice long sheet of paper here. So not a lot has changed here. I might let our deputy CFO, if she has any thoughts on, whoa, that looks terrible. That's impossible to read. There we go.
New firefighters.
Yeah. But she might be able to just speak to some of the changes that she added in after the feedback we got from the last meeting, different sections that felt that needed to be expanded a little bit for more detail. Overall, the numbers haven't really changed. It's just a bit more detail provided there in formatting type pieces.
Thank you, Chris. So yes, as Chris mentioned, some major changes from our last budget meeting. You'll notice on line 36, we've got that full hydro dividend in there, the 3.6. So that's based on the COSA rate increase. So that ties into line 77. So what we've done is we've only kept the dividend plus inflation in the operating budget, and the remainder amount is put to capital reserves, because that is still a little bit of a question mark.
Well, it's an ongoing process, as you know. We think we just filed, was it on Monday that they filed the last, or was it Monday? Or the ones with the BCUC anyway. I think there's still some other IRs that are ongoing, but.
Yeah, we've answered the CUC staff IRs, now we're answering interveners IRs, so. Yeah, lots of process there.
Sorry, where did you say it went instead? Capital reserves?
Yeah, we bumped up the building reserve on
Oh,
line
building
78.
reserve, thank you.
Mayor?
yes, Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, as we're developing this, the new BC budget dropped, so is there any implications there that you, maybe it's just, it doesn't impact us, I don't know.
I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I don't, other than the, the $1 billion that they had announced earlier was in that budget. And I think we're expecting those letters here shortly, hopefully in the next few weeks. But that's a one-time funding. It's not ongoing funding.
And it would be for capital, so it would go into a reserve or something to be used for capital projects. It wouldn't assist us with the tax rate that we're looking for, so.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Tate?
Hi, thank you so much for this. I really love it. I really love that you put the sales of service and all the little pieces coming out. Thank you.
That's awesome.
What, I have to ask, where is the, is it in here, the IT part with regards to the 911 upgrade? I forget the name of it, you know?
Next Gen 911?
Next Gen, yeah.
Yep, it's in our, coming out of our capital reserve. So this shows you the money going into the capital reserve,
Yep.
and then we've got all those spreadsheets for
Yep.
capital that show these amounts going into each reserve and
Yep.
then the capital. So it was I believe in the, I can't remember which reserve, I can't remember which reserve we put it out of.
Not an
yeah.
offer.
I can pull it.
Yeah. So-
Okay, so you moved the dividend, the 553 that used to kind of be floating at the bottom. Where are we going to put it? Into the building reserves, and that happens to be where the next gen thing would come out of.
Not the building reserve, no, it was
I
either,
misheard you.
it was either the water license reserve or the equipment reserve, one of those two. I
Oh,
think
for
it might have
the
been the water
IT.
license reserve, yeah.
Okay, but we can.
Is where it's coming out of, yeah.
And just in terms of next gen, sorry, not to answer your question, but I just, I don't know, you know, when you can't sleep at night, you make the mistake of turning on your computer. The next gen, so within the budget, maybe, there was some reference to money that the government now, so as we've all put in these, they must have sensed it. They must have heard that probably every community was putting in to go forward with to the UBCM and their local government associations. The fact that best the government fund next gen. I see that there is, I don't know, I want to say it was like 148 million carved out or something for next gen. It's just a number that's in my head because there was a number of them there. What I'm unclear about, and that's always is where I'm always unclear as the politician, is do we need to be writing to say we need some of that money, particularly because we're a bit different than the way everybody else does their 911 call out. Is that inherent on us to have to do the work to make sure we get our share of the pie? Or does the share of the pie just get divvied up like this $1 billion is gonna be? Because again, like, do we have to get our grant writing expertise out and make sure that we are positioned to get our share of that money?
We'd have to inquire. I don't know if those details. As you've seen, they've done two things in the past. Either you have to write your grant or they give you so much per community. In this one, since I guess it's
We discussed this last week.
oh, did you? Okay.
So this was a topic of discussion at the meeting that the UBCM board last week. And so I do think we have to go to the province and ask for the portion of the 90 million that's going to ECOM. Because we're providing that same level of service, but the province may not have us on the list. It wasn't lost at, I think we had the president of the board association for police and first responders at the meeting. That's where it came up as a discussion. So they definitely are earmarked a big portion of funds to get ECOM on the other side of the hardware upgrade. I think we do need to send a letter and say we need our apportionment of that, and so does Prince Rupert. There's another community that is in the same boat as us. There's a couple. We're not the only one. So I think we do need to send that. And then there's another 60 million available that the UBCM will be administering through a granting stream for cost,
Right.
staffing and training getting everybody up to speed on how to use the new system.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should send a letter for sure.
Yeah, we just definitely want to get our foot in the door, even if we don't know exactly what our plan is going to look like. I don't want to miss out on that money, considering the fact that, that at least the government has realized to some extent that they need to be paying for this. We didn't choose to have the CRTC change the regulations, and yet we're expected to carry the costs of implementing a program. And I think everybody around the table believes that safety is a primary job of us to make sure that everybody is safe, so we need to have our appropriate services in place, so.
Do we need a motion for a letter, or you guys?
I think,
No.
staff, I think we've given them clear direction here is that, yeah, I think, some time spent going through those budgetary submissions that are announcements and making sure that we're capitalizing on them. I did see some that looked to me like old money that they've just reframed with a new title, and it's money that still hasn't been spent from back to 2016, but this was definitely new money.
Yeah, yeah, we gotta get a piece of that.
Okay, sorry for that. Just, you brought up the next gen and my head went,
That's what I do, is I
my-
bring up the things.
my head went down the street. Yeah, sorry, back to you, Amy.
Okay. Some other changes, we did break out a couple of the line items that you guys had requested. For example, sales of services, other revenues, parks and rec cultural services in the expenses. Other than that, we kind of went through with a fine comb, and we think this is the best for 2023 we can do.
I have a question.
Yes,
Thanks. Waste and organics line 14 versus waste and organics line 61. Don't we try to make those match? I know it's only like, it's less than 40 grand, but.
So some of those revenues aren't showing in line 14 because we do have some operating grants that we're receiving next year for the food cycler, so that difference
Okay.
would be found in line 26 under the grants.
We also budget for a surplus that goes into that, transfers to the resource recovery reserve, right? That
Okay.
would then go to fund capital.
So part of the 547 goes into the resource recovery?
Well, you've got your revenue from from the fees we charge.
Yep.
Plus there's some operating grants in there.
Oh, okay,
Um,
gotcha.
Then there's the expenses, and the net surplus goes into the resource recovery reserve, which helps us pay for food cyclers.
So there's not actually like, in reality, a deficit between the 547 and the 583 because you're getting a grant and then it.
Yep.
Okay, correct, gotcha. Thank you.
back to you.
Yep, okay. We haven't put any tax increase into the 2023 budget, but, if you go down to where we're looking at for a deficit on line 93, and this is before those additional asks from the community groups that came and presented, we're looking at 536,874, which is about a 5.5% tax increase to balance that. Again, this is without any of those additional asks. All three of those groups did apply for the COVID recovery grant as well, just for information, and we're going through those applications now. There's some information that we still need to reach out to them and get some replies on, not just these three, but for most part, missing information from, there's 19 that applied, by the way. Maybe I should just back up. We had 19 apply. The total amount that's being asked for is 400,000. We have 200,000. We're looking for some additional information from a lot of the groups, mainly to show what their revenues were like pre-COVID. We're getting a lot of, hey, here's what we're looking like now, but it's hard to go and say like, well, it's hard to assess the impact of COVID if I'm not sure what you looked like before. So just kind of going back and getting that information. I know we had hoped to bring something to you at the next meeting, but I just want to make sure we have time to get everything back in. So we might have to just extend it a little bit and let those groups know that we're in order to make it a fair assessment, I think we need all the information from everyone, not to leave any gaps. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's just kind of combing through that and reaching out to folks and getting some more information where needed.
Councillor Lochner.
So that, are you, through the chair,
Chris, are you looking to bring it back to us for sort of final approval?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, no, I think we would, similar to what we did last time, is kind of go through them, come up with a, you know, hey, here's our recommendation. Here's a matrix that sort of shows you, here's all the applicants, here's what they asked for, here's what they wanted to use the funds for, here's kind of what, you know, a scoring matrix, and here's kind of our recommendation of how to use the 200,000, and then, you know, final decision, you know, yes, that's, makes sense to us, or you can ask questions, or, you know, try and go from there. I think is kind of what we were thinking.
Yeah, so, Mayor, if I may follow up on that, then just some guidance from me.
Yeah.
Council, the rest of the council may have a different perspective on this. I definitely would like to see a kind of a before and after, so that, you know, and try to have it be as rigorous as possible. The second thing I would like to see, this wouldn't be definitive, but it would be helpful, is what's the impact generally on sort of the city's contribution, or like, would this do two things at once from the taxpayer's perspective? Like, would it help, would it help offset future other investments that the city would have to make in that organization? In other words, and I don't know, this will be a good, again, I'm open for discussion, but my understanding, the way I'd like to think about this is, are they sort of delivering a service for the city in a way that we've kind of vetted in the past? I'm thinking of capital, I'm thinking of civic, you know, we're making contributions to them. We do sort of a rigorous due diligence on their finances. Anything that we can offset or anything that we can do to contribute to them would have an impact on taxpayers, because it would help offset other investments that we would have to make in the future. Those kinds of things I'd love to see. Again, it wouldn't be definitive, but it would certainly help inform and guide my decision making. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see the names on there and they'll make sense to you, and you'll know which ones are, you know, there's a lot that you may or may not have heard of before, for, you know, we could definitely add something if there's maybe similar to that large matrix we did, if here's the grants that we provide to small or other organizations, not-for-profits, you could sort of see that if there's something there, like, do we provide other funding to these groups on an annual basis? Outside of those three, there may not be that,
Okay.
but yeah.
I think just for clarity, I'm
Yeah.
always trying to, recently, really trying to lean into this idea of the balance between public and private good. And I find that sometimes in our decision making, we just kind of mix them up. So we deliver public taxpayer money into organizations that deliver very limited public good. It tends to be private or very limited to the community. And as much as possible, I'd like to make it more reflective of what the public good that organization is delivering, so that we don't sort of continue down the road of sort of favoring or biasing towards people who had power in the past, or you know, just through status quo. We just keep investing in sort of the same organizations that deliver relatively narrow service to the community. That's all.
Yeah, it even just looking at the financials, it's going to be challenging to go into each one and try and, you know, assess, you know, where are their memberships, like, you know, where do the folks live? Are they Nelson based? Are they regional? Are they, you know, how, it's just at the amount that I've gone through so far. I mean, there's some tough questions to ask, like, you know, and 10 different people could maybe see 10 different things. So it's going to be challenging for sure.
So I guess that's just,
Yeah.
that'll be, that responsibility to make those assessments will sort of land on us.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
But we'll provide you, you know, a summary of everything, so you don't have to go through it all, just kind of something that will encapsulate sort of, you know, the high level points there that we think might be relevant.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, we can probably look on their, if they have a web page, or we could ask them for their, whatever their mission or their, you know, who they're trying to serve. I guess we, you know, normally you have to, well, most groups do have, you know, that part done. So as far as, I guess we could ask a few more questions. We'll see what we get, and if anybody else, finds that on web pages or something, just maybe circulate it so that everybody has that same information.
No, I have Councillor Tate, then Councillor Page.
I don't know if you're still going line by line. I have line by line questions. Okay. So I didn't know where we were.
Okay.
When do I interrupt? I'm not sure.
No, well, you interrupted now, and that's good, so we'll go back to your line to line. Maybe we'll just, Councillor Page has a comment on the current discussion, and then we'll go back up to the top of the page or whatever line we need to go to. Councillor Tate?
Sure, yep. I'm good.
Perfect.
Thanks.
I want us to urge caution and also kind of like treat some of this exercise the way we want the province to treat us sometimes, and not being overly onerous on the administrative asks for the people that are asking for this pot of money. We've got our submission process, people put things in, we'll have some subjective opinions at this table that will come, and we'll try and get as much information as possible. But there's also that challenge of can you update your website, or, because you're gonna ask for the website, they're gonna go look and see if they need to update their website, and how is your mission going to be delivered with this particular funding? These are COVID relief funding pieces. These are mostly going to be groups we have a good understanding of, and the back and forth is the same thing we complain about when we want to go ask for funding upstream. Like, what is the purpose of this funding? Let's get it in people's hands. Let's let them spend it in our community. Let's use discretion, but let's not be overly onerous in the kinds of asks and how much wheel churning we're incentivizing as people ask for the money, not necessarily knowing if they're going to get the money. It sounds like 50% of the asks will end up on the floor anyway. So we can get too onerous sometimes on how much burden we put on people when they're coming to receive relief after something like a pandemic. And so it's just a word of caution that we'll never get to perfect anyway. We're going to know who these groups are.
I'm good with that. I'm gonna throw a nickel in on this conversation in terms of the fact that you're both right in some regards. And when I listen to Councillor Lockenberg, and you and I rarely agree. I used to say that around the table all the time. I guess I can say it from this chair too. But in terms of, I think when I listen to you talk, and I just really, I'm here to listen more than, and to bang the gavel periodically, is something like we did actually with fees and charges in recreation. And you remember sitting at that table, and because it took a long time for the regional district to go through that process and to base fees. So I'm not talking about what we're doing with this COVID money, but that contemplation of how do you balance public and private, and the fee structure that we kind of landed on there really was, when you start looking at fees, that fees are the more public, the lesser the fee, the more private, the higher the fee. Not just a fee, but that you're trying to put on that hat to make sure that the majority of people, and again, as at recreation, if you recall, it was youth programming kind of ahead of adult programming. And so I understand where you're trying to go. I don't know that this particular 200K that's now oversubscribed by 100% is where we want to fall on the sword. But I think that's the philosophy and the premise behind what you're saying is an important one when we contemplate any of the things that we do around the council table. I mean, because we're here for all of the citizens, and we have to make sure that we consider everyone. And some people can afford to do things, and other people can't afford to do things. And so I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying. And so both good points, but I think this council probably wears those two hats, or the one hat, and tries to balance it really well, of that balancing between public and private interests. So I think that we'll manage well. We'll have moments where we kind of fall apart, but I think that I think that we wear that hat all the time in terms of, and it's good to think that way. It's good to think in as many, you know, I saw the other thing the other day. What was it? It was a cartoon. It was like, what is this? I'm thinking outside the box. So, sorry. Anyways, so I think we can go back to,
Add, Madam Mayor, that, so there is a requirement of a certain level of due diligence. If it's public money, you know, we need to make sure the entity is actually a legitimate entity that actually has filed financial statements and those sorts of things. So there's a level that, you know, that we would need to do just to make sure that, you know, this money is going to a legitimate organization. And we may know all 19 of these, or we may know, and we have to be fair to everyone, right? Like if we require financial statements, you should provide financial statements, and that's just a minimum requirement to be there, but we'll certainly not try to be too onerous.
so Councillor Tate, what line would you like to go to, please?
I have a question about line 82, which has $40,000 going to the bridge reserve. And on February 3rd, we had $380,000 going to the bridge reserve. Can you speak to that? In this one, remember
Yeah.
this one?
That might have been
one?
380,000 coming out of the bridge reserve?
No, it's under contributions. I wouldn't lie.
Oh, sorry, from the bridge reserve to that reserve. This is how complicated we try to make things.
Yeah?
I didn't provide a schedule of the bridge reserve, but
Yeah.
rather you think about it as the bridge reserve
Yeah.
is funding into the capital projects reserve.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
then it
Oh,
comes
this
out
is
there.
going into it. I gotcha. Okay. And then I'm curious, but my eyeballs may not have seen it. The Community Works Fund is not on this big page, or do I just not see it?
Correct. We don't include it goes straight into the reserve. We don't record it as revenue and then into the reserve. It just comes straight into the reserve. Why do we do that? It's a great question.
So, but it's not listed here like from line 77 to 89.
Yeah,
It's a separate one?
it's just without that money, 100% of it goes straight into our community. We get the money and it goes straight into that reserve.
like,
So it
okay.
doesn't even pass go, it goes straight into.
So this is whatever flows through the general operating
Yeah.
reserve, and since that one doesn't, it doesn't show up on
Yeah.
here.
Because we don't transfer anything into it.
We don't use any of it for operations, it just goes straight into the reserve. So rather than show it come in and then go out,
Yeah.
just straight in.
Love. Okay, this is fun. Thank you.
But maybe that should change.
Well, all of these ones here are our choice, right? Like we have the revenue, we have a certain amount that we, by bylaw or whatever, put into reserve. The Community Works Fund is, there's specified things that it can be used for, so it goes right into the reserve. It's not our revenue that we're funding into a reserve,
But perhaps grants conditional?
that's where it would go, yeah. And when you see our final financial statements, it does go into there.
Okay.
Cool.
Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a query on reserves. Like let's say the wastewater sewer plant. And as we're, we know we have to redo that. We do build that reserve every year. But do we start building like larger amounts as we get closer to that rebuild
Yeah,
period, or is it calculated as steady state?
And that's not part of this piece. So we have our water utility, and it has its own revenue source, and it has its own capital and its own reserve. We have the wastewater, which is the same, and we have hydro, which is the same. They have their own revenues. This is really only the ones that are impacted by taxation. It's just our general revenue. So we try to have water and wastewater and hydro just be self-sufficient on their own revenues and not have taxes in and out of those ones.
They would have like their own separate big sheet.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And so for simplicity,
Which
this
we've
is
looked
just, we're trying to do this in chunks. Like we get rid of the hydro piece, the water, the wastewater. Okay, now we can just sort of focus on what do we need to fund through general revenues and taxation. And this is this piece here. And then when you see your 5-year financial plan, that has everything. It has your taxes, your water fees, your wastewater fees, hydro, everything kind of rolled into one, but this is just sort of that general revenue piece. Yeah, so you don't see the water and wastewater on this.
So, but to answer your question, when you looked at the, wastewater and water reserves, remember we changed how much we were charging for wastewater versus water a couple years ago, because we were anticipating that we had this big need on upgrading that plant, so we actually increased wastewater fees, we lowered water fees, and there is more going into the wastewater to help fund that larger project.
Okay, great. So it's sort of like, I always have that term, rate smoothing, rolled in, when we're doing this, because the idea of like trying to avoid these spikes, right? Trying to have a smooth process towards the final goal.
Right, and we're trying to do that with all these reserves, so we, that's why we're contributing, similar amounts annually, and then you'll see in the reserve balance that we have I think the fire truck's always a good example. A fire truck, a large equipment expenditure, it'll draw that reserve down, and then over time we'll build it back up, and it creates that smoothing effect. Otherwise, we'd have to tax much higher in that year that we're gonna replace a fire truck versus when we're replacing pickup trucks.
Thank you.
But to your point, Jesse, because I have the wastewater budget one, then the ending reserve balance for that big project right now looks like 15.7 million at the end of 2023 from our previous,
Okay.
from this one.
Yep.
For everyone at home,
Yeah,
They're seeing that.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, no big deal. So like that, so it isn't, it's like healthy, I
Yeah.
guess. I'm gonna just tell you that it looks like we're putting in 2.8 million into the wastewater reserves this year.
Right.
Does that sound right? I'm
Yep,
kind
I'd
of-
have to look at our big sheet
Yeah.
again, but that sounds about right. It's primarily capital that drives those utilities, so that would make a lot of sense.
Thank you.
okay, I'm gonna go to Councillor Lockenberg for a minute, and then I'll come back to some more lines from you, Councillor Tate.
Maybe.
Sorry, I
Just don't wanna, like, it depends, if we're talking about, say, I wanna make sure I get people when we're on the topic,
Totally.
before we go to the next line.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna jump all the way back up, if I may. I'm feeling like I'm paying a bit of catch up here. Can we jump back to line 13, the cemetery fees? It just occurred to me, and I'm sort of a little slow right at this moment. Did we not at the last previous meeting talk about increasing fees? I thought we did, or at least we asked staff to review it. Did we not?
On cemetery and specifically, or
Yeah.
all
Am
fees?
I totally off? on that?
No, I think we did talk about, because it came up through the, what we're charging the regional district, and I think Chris mentioned that we,
The regional district increase.
we really haven't kind of looked at that closely, and we should look at that. I don't know if we are gonna be able to do that between now and this financial plan.
That would be my thinking, is that that's been on the radar for quite a while before I even got here, is to take a look at those, and it's just one of those things that keeps, other priorities come up, and it just doesn't move to the top of the pile. So if for me to budget for higher cemetery fees and then say, okay, now we better get that thing done, I agree it needs to be done, but then conservatively, this would be just at the fees that we have currently.
And I think further to that, we did, in the discussion about the cemetery, it's always strikes, like, every budget year, we always talk about the cemetery. It's kind of interesting. And it is one of those things that, like, when you look at the amount of money, you can see why that probably falls off when you're dealing with something that's 2.5 million somewhere else. But I think in terms of that too, I don't know, city manager, I think maybe you were gonna talk with the director of that service in terms of looking about whether or not we could tease out, because of the fact that the cemetery, I like to refer to it as a park, it's a memorial park, is a park, to sort of try to tease out the costing that goes up there that is, say more for digging the burial plots versus the fact that we're keeping that as a wonderful amenity for the city of Nelson, but whether or not we could sort of tease that out and see whether or not, in terms of increasing costs in general, let alone having the conversation that the regional district probably, needs to contribute more, whether or not that, then that would justify perhaps a reason for increasing what the interment fees might be that we have within the city. Just to tease that out, because right now I think all of that kind of gets billed as kind of like cemetery.
Yeah.
So whether they're mowing the grass or digging the burial plots.
Yeah.
And so just trying to see, like, are we getting at least cost recovery from cemetery service, I guess.
And I would just say, Mayor, from my perspective, it's one of those things that I just don't know. Like, maybe it's double to get cost recovery. Maybe we would double the fees, in which case, certainly over 10 years, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not approaching $1 million. So it adds up. I mean, one time, not significant, but certainly over 10 years, it starts to really look significant. So
I'll talk to Director Henderson about, we'll set something up, another work order that they can, when they go up there, if they're pruning trees, that's one thing, but if they're working
Yeah.
on cemetery services, then we
Yeah.
kind of track what that is separately. We do that in other, like down at Lakeside, you're doing hanging baskets, you're cutting the grass, like there's different work orders. We just have cemetery, so it's just the way it's been, but we could get better.
I think that was some of the discussion that we had earlier about the cemetery, so that just gives us a better position
Yeah.
going on, that when we, come down facing this question again, or if somebody actually has time on the side of their desk, that's kind of funny, that this actually gets done beforehand. I mean, then we'll just know that. I mean, because of course, if we increase the cost, that has to come back to us as a fees and charges bylaw to increase the rate, and that doesn't have to come in the middle of the budget session. That can come at any time of the year when we see that there's a need.
And I would just tie it back to what you had said earlier, picking up on your point earlier, and replicating what has happened over at Recreation, of what is our guiding principle in terms of public versus private fee structure. Because maybe it can be a package of work that kind of is a scan across a number of different fee schedules, including what event fees qualify for. If the youth center is having an event or something related to that one of the schools, that might be a completely different fee for the Pier versus a private wedding, where they're going to actually close it off and you won't have the opportunity to come and go. And once we get clear on when and what groups warrant that increased level of subsidy, I think then we can lay down some principles that staff can look at the cemetery fees and be like, how does that apply here? And they can look at the event fees and say, how does that apply here? And then we're not picking it piecemeal off. It can be.
Well, it's nice not to change that bylaw every week.
for sure. And to Councillor Page's point, I think there is a precedent. I think I shared the city of Squamish does have a general policy about how do you divide public versus private good, and then what's that percentage look like when you assign a fees and charges to any specific service. So I agree. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, back to pick a line.
No, I was having fun in the Local Government Act looking at 1960 cemetery rules. Municipal Cemeteries Act. No, I'm good for now. Keep on keeping on. Thank you.
Okay, so nobody else got their hand up? Okay, back to you guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, here we are.
So Chris,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have the spreadsheet in Excel
Yep.
available. So what does it look like with the 5.5 on the other years?
If it was 5.5 the whole way across?
Now, if you put a 5.5 here, what does, because we have these shortfalls in these other years, it's not just
Yeah, that's.
23, right?
We've strategically picked those numbers at the top there that if you did put in that 5.5, you'd probably be pretty close to balancing with those other numbers there across the top. If that makes
That's
sense.
only if you don't do an increase this year.
Yeah.
We need a 5.5, then we can have 4, 3, 2, and 2. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Because all those years right now with those 4, 3, 2, and 2 have big deficits, right? If you look at
Yeah, I follow.
line under
Yeah.
93.
But putting a 5.5 into 2023 then gets those other years fairly close to balance. There's some little bit of wiggle, this and that to get them to be an exact zero, but yeah.
Yeah, and a good example of that is policing. So wherever that is,
Is what?
is
Policing.
police. If you look at line 49, it's the, the budget increase from 2022 is about, just over 300,000. But, by the time that fully, because we've assumed hirings halfway through the year, people are off, et cetera, so that the impact of the decision this year actually is 5.875 in 2024. So if you don't do that tax increase now, we start to run into large problems in those future years.
If you were to break that 5.5 out, 3.3% is for police and 2.2% would be for inflationary increases for the rest of the city.
So I have a question. So you're telling me that line 93 is 5.5, but we actually have line 101. And this is, of course, the additional community asks is always where council has discretion as to whether or not we give all of it, none of it, or some of it amount to those organizations. If we were to fully fund the additional community asks, what is the 599,434 percentage increase?
I'm gonna guess it's about 6.2. I'm gonna check it out. Yeah, pretty close. 6.2.
And then my other question is, do we have a comparator of year over year of our additional, like these groups? I did have, I did show you something that we've had in the
Yeah.
past,
I think I
to
provided
consider.
that at the last,
Earlier.
yeah.
Yeah, did we get that earlier?
Yes, yeah, it was
Okay.
a big one that
Last
sort of
meeting?
shows all the groups and the additional
Yeah, the
asks.
fact that we've done, like, we do
Yep.
some of them, we do insurance, we do the PTEs, so in terms of the value that we are already giving besides the asks, okay.
I provided it after the first arts group came.
Right.
And then we didn't know what was gonna happen with the last group that came to the Cal meeting, but
Right.
the 80,000 was the same. They weren't asking
Yeah,
for anything
yeah,
additional,
and
so it's
there's
just
no
those arts
change, yeah.
groups.
So, if, I don't know, I'm open to any discussion here, council, like, so it's 5.5 or 6.2. If we say that we want the number to be 5.5, where do we trim? Perhaps I should ask the CFO and
So,
deputy CFO.
A couple of thoughts. One, we do have this year the COVID recovery grants that those groups would be eligible to receive, not saying that they will, and we'll be having a decision on the COVID recovery grants before we make a final decision on tax rates. So there's that to consider. Second, I know that there is some, at least preliminary work being done on service agreements with these groups. So is that something that maybe should be done before? Just some things to maybe think about as far as timing on these things.
Councillor Payne and then CAO.
Yeah, I guess I agree. I'm interested to know where we are at on the service agreements. The challenge that I would see if we considered the COVID release funding instead of these increases is how does that affect that carrying on without understanding what the service agreements are. So if I ask for a 10% increase this year, I get to a certain point so that when I come next year and ask for an increase, it's based off this year. Whereas if we say, well, we'll give them the COVID release money, COVID relief funding instead of an increase, then now when they come next year, they're working on last year's amount to get an increase on. Am I making any sense there? Okay. That's the concern that I would have. around that. So the service agreements are, I think, a pretty important component of this decision.
Yeah, I think, I understand there was a big discussion about service agreements, and just to be clear, really all we're looking at it in there, and we're clear with the groups, that doesn't commit a council that you would fund at those levels. We'll always have the ability for council to make different decisions, but I think what they're asking for is at least they have something on paper of the intention of what that ongoing funding is. So I just want to make sure people know that would not commit a future council, or even this council the next year could say, no, we've changed directions 100% and we're going to do something totally different. One of the values we felt, I think that's the value to the organization. The value to the city was being clear on what service they have committed to provide for that funding that the city is providing. And right now, they come and make a presentation and say, here are the things we're doing. The service agreement would lay out, much like the visitor information agreement does say, you must be open this many hours, you must be provide this much staffing, et cetera, et cetera. So the city would have more influence over what that kind of minimum level of service that you expect for your contribution. So, which would, I think, is good on both parties. There's clear understanding of what that service level looks like. So just to clarify what we're looking at on those service agreements. So I don't think it's necessary to get all that in place before, you kind of figure out the budget. I think there's a commitment, if council wants us to work on that, there's a commitment on both sides to, to lay that out. The other thing is, asking for a 24% increase is significant. So certainly that is by far the biggest driver of the additional ask by the groups. And, if you want to, if council's interested in sort of increasing the funding of some of these organizations, our recommendation, you might do that over time as opposed to have, that full impact on 1 year, do it over 3 years or something like that. I see the capital asked for a 10% inflation, I think was, somewhere between 7 and 8%. So you might, this is an unusual year in terms of that higher inflation. But some of these costs that, that the city's traditionally funded are, things like, what we charge them for water and sewer and things like that, which we've been keeping at the 2% range. So we're not putting those type of cost pressures on them. So anyway, that's just some options that you could consider, looking at some of those other groups.
Before I go to Councillor Lockberg, do you have a follow-up?
I do.
Okay, so we'll go back to you for the follow-up, then Councillor Lockberg, then Councillor Page.
So I guess I'm not understanding the service agreements then, because I thought from the perspective of the other parties that would provide them some sort of multi-year funding model upon which to base their strategic growth, as opposed to coming each year and requesting funds the way they always have. So is that not part of the intention of the service agreement? So for an example, the Mural Festival came prior to this council, I believe, and asked for a multi-year commitment, and the previous council said yes. So that, in my experience, makes it easier to plan out where that event is going to go with some solid, not having to figure it out year by year. That was my understanding of the service agreement. So have I got that wrong?
Well, a council could make that decision and
Okay.
and commit yourself to a certain period of funding without any out clause. We don't do that in I think any of our agreements. So again, doesn't mean you can't. What you can't do is fetter the rights of future councils, right? So this council, I would certainly recommend that you wouldn't extend it past your term. If this council feels that's the right thing to do, then you certainly have that authority. Almost all our agreements have the ability to, like our lease agreement with Touchstones, we have a year, I think it's a year, that we can give notice that you must vacate our building. So that's to make sure that, they're owned by the city of Nelson and they're the city assets, and you can't, councils have the right to decide what they do with their facilities.
Yeah, I think that we would, based on those service agreements, we would have something in the budget for those years, and they wouldn't need to come, in February and sort of make a pitch like, hey, this is how much we're asking for. That would be in there as the default. It would just be, there would be potentially something in there should circumstances change, that would change. But the default for them would be, they know what they're getting.
Perfect. Okay, that was my understanding, and I think it's only fair and reasonable to have, if circumstances change in a significant way. Yeah, okay, thank you. I just needed to understand that.
Councillor Lockenberg.
And I would say the other thing that I heard from them is that these service agreements are becoming more standard, and so there's an expectation from granting organizations, probably like a checkbox, like, do you have a service agreement with your municipality? And so from that perspective, it makes sense. My question or comment is related to, again, it comes back to that public-private good component. So in the community charter, there is, when I come back to the community charter as like, what are we here to do? And why? And one of them is to foster the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the community. That's one of our sort of core responsibilities. And then, balancing that with this notion of public and private good, the capital, it's a tough argument. I could imagine somebody making the argument that it's almost a wholly private good because you have to pay to go. The entertainment and the cultural values are sort of more personal. However, I do believe that the capital does have a public good, particularly around certain events. And I would almost, I want to get this on the record, sort of a signal to Stephanie and to the capital that the public good that I see from the capital in particular is to help the community see itself, reflect itself, tell stories about itself. I think in an age of fragmentation and social media, we lose some of that historical ability to recognize what is Nelson, and there's a common sense of who we are. And I think things like at Christmas, the pantomime is sort of one of those things where you go and you realize, oh man, this is who we are. They're telling stories about ourselves, and I think there's a powerful value and even a municipal responsibility in supporting that kind of activity. Less so when you're talking about just sort of entertainment or even sort of general cultural enrichment. I think that tends to drift more towards the private good. And therefore, that's sort of the balance that I think we're striking here in this investment. 10% increase to the capital, I mean, is only 7,000, and I could see Stephanie turning that 7,000 into a lot of good. It does seem for me to reflect that balance of the public-private good, given what the capital is doing, and maybe if this signal is sent and heard that more events, and I can think of a few that really did create this sense of cultural identity. I remember Mitch Scott used to do these backcountry events there that was really, there's a sense of real strong community building in those events. So those were great, more of those. And then that sort of addresses some of the community charter responsibilities. On the Touchstone side of things, one thing that Astrid said that really pinged for me that I hadn't quite considered before is the public good that the Nelson Museum and Art Gallery provide today are some of the record keeping, the history keeping, the archive work that is our responsibility. It is very much a part of our protecting the social well-being of the community. I get that, as well as it's a bit of a public asset. So they are doing stuff that we should be contributing to. a 24% increase, to be honest, is more than, given the balance of other priorities, like in terms of our responsibilities, you start checking them off. We have to be significantly increasing investment, I believe, in other areas. So I'm 24% is a big ask, given that that's at 54,000, and we'll carry. I mean, in 4 years, that's 250,000 or $220,000 or something like that. So it starts to add up over time. But if we could, I'm a little hesitant there. That's, to me, pretty rich. But in general, as long as we're not going to see sort of inflationary increases after that, and I'm not sure about the fundraising on. I know we've asked both Astrid and Stephanie about what they're doing to really increase their fundraising. I'd really like to see more on that side of things, and I think maybe the service agreements will help with that. But I'm a hesitant yes on both of those for those reasons.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Councillor Page is next.
In a small way, I would probably just suggest the touchstones, if we are going to go with these additional asks, I'd put them both at 10%, just for this year, just even-handed it. What I heard in the discussion about service agreements is a need and an opportunity at a future council meeting or workshop to have a discussion about service agreements and what values go into them, and whether we are or are not going to put inflationary increases in there, because there might be significant reasons we would want to, how long they might last, and how often they'll be renewed to meet the needs of both the organization and ourselves. What values out of both our official community planning and strategic visioning are the ones we're going to be making these kinds of contributions to, and how big is that overall pot going to be? Like, I think we want to have those discussions so that we're looking at these service agreements as a whole, as a function that we're using to leverage nonprofits in our community to deliver services that we ourselves would potentially be delivering, or that we see value in making sure we're getting that knock-on effect. So I don't want us not to have that conversation. I want us to really just have a time when we talk about laying the foundations of these service agreements out, so that they go a bit beyond current practice and are going to be able to fill the role and the vision of what they potentially will accomplish within the community. And I think that needs a council discussion that's more fulsome than what we can have right now in this moment. So I just want to flag that, whether it's at a conversation we have at strategic planning to identify that as larger work, and it ties right back in to the public-private good conversation we've been having throughout most of this afternoon of, like, how and where do we make these contributions, and then send money back out to the organizations, that, like, what values are we identifying that then warrants this organization versus another organization being eligible for this kind of relationship with the city.
Can I
But I think it's just a bigger conversation.
Yeah, can I just clarify from a staff point of view how we'd see that? Like, I think that's your policy work.
Yeah.
Right? So council would develop the policy, the administration is getting it into the service agreement.
Yeah.
I can
Yep.
go after.
Yep, you will. She is next.
So I just want to point out that I see these organizations as meeting a very significant role in the city's calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. In my opinion, they're doing most of the heavy lifting by bringing in the variety of cultural connections that they do, the exhibits that they do, which we are called to do as a municipality. That's important work that we need to step up to, and these bodies are doing it. So is that culture? Yeah, it's a deep part of our culture. So whether we see that as private, I don't. I see it as a public obligation, and I don't go to obligation very often, but it's mandatory. It's just the right thing to do. That's one thing. Then I'll go to the museum in particular, because I think the point that Astrid was trying to bring in is that in 2014, the city's percentage of funding to the museum, well, it's fallen, and I can show everybody, I don't know if anybody, this is one of the ones she showed. So the 24% is just getting them back to not even close to where they would have been if the percentage of contribution from the city hadn't fallen off fairly dramatically in the last 10 years. So again, are we going to see them as a holder of the archives? A significant part of what we do with Truth and Reconciliation, and looking further forward, a major contributor to how we can engage the entire population around climate adaptation and mitigation. The arts are going to play a huge role in that, but they need to, have our support and assistance to do that. So 24%, maybe not in one big chunk, but to get them back to their level of contribution as a, in my opinion, public good, especially when I think of all the free and, families and the mountain bike thing where people who'd never been in there got into the museum. The benefit is incalculable. It's pretty hard to bring it down to dollars and cents. But the other thing at the Capitol, if anyone's ever participated or had their children participated in the summer theater,
Right.
That's a huge, if you look back at people coming out of there who have gone out into the world, wow, incredible event. So I am passionate about this. I am the council representative on the Cultural Development Committee, and I definitely personally support all of these organizations because privately and publicly, they have a huge event to me. I know they've been, at the Capitol, they could have raised more money, but they've been trying to keep their prices reasonable so that it's not just private, as in high culture has been known for many years, where you had to have a lot of money to participate. Most people can go.
Say, as the rep, the call to action is how do you get regional participation? Because that's
Okay.
the missing part
Thank
of
you.
this is
I can
if
talk about
the
that.
region actually supported that, which they are regional facilities. If you go to the Capitol, if you go to the museum, the museum does not just, did that artifact happen in the city of Nelson? It's capturing the whole history of our region here, right?
Perfect, thank you for that, because as I am sort of learning what my role is there, but I definitely see benefits. So regional participation, got it.
Counselor Tate, Lockenberg, Woodward.
Are you guys still on the three lines at the bottom? Keep going. I'll pop in after.
Okay,
I've spoken on this, Woodward. if Councillor
yeah,
Woodward wants
but
to-
Counselor Woodward, you better take a crack at this.
Well, I think one of the things I've been trying to do in the last bunch of years here is think of Nelson's not an island. We're not an island. We're a flow-through community, both regionally, locally, and with tourism. So, as we do budgets, as we make votes and get educated, just try to remember that it's not just to the borders of our town. It's so much wider than that. So, however we're doing support is really a regional piece. It's almost with everything, with housing, arts, with sports. It's all regional. So it's been a big leap for me to when I originally got here to now. I feel like I've really kind of expanded that out to the whole regional piece. It's helped me with my decision making. That's for sure. Thank you.
One of the things that I sort of harped on a few times over the last 4.5 years is the contribution from the Nelson Kootenai Lake tourism to some of these cultural events. I think like Councillor Payne said, the Capitol, for example, has been a promoter of Nelson to the world in a number of different ways, including the talent that's come through and beyond. And I think the investment into those cultural assets delivers a return from a tourism perspective much greater than almost anything that Nelson Kootenai Lake tourism does today. And I think that's the way that the business community should be contributing to its promotion of the region, is through our cultural, as opposed to doing sort of ad and marketing campaigns that I'm sure they have an effect, but I don't think that they deliver the sort of return of value. They don't sort of double up in terms of value, in terms of marketing and then delivering value back to the community. So I would like to see, again, Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism to use some of their, and I think there is, if I'm not mistaken, in the legislation, they can start to contribute more of their income back into our cultural institutions. That would be great to see. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, didn't we ask staff at some point to explore or to talk with Diana about that? I'm not sure. It might have been, maybe we did it through rec at some point. But the idea of that, at least a contribution from Nelson and Kootenai Lake Tourism to come back would be great. And that could be part of the fundraising work, both that these two Capital and Touchstones do, which is get more money from the region, look at other sources of income, including Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism, and not sort of just put it on the ticket price. Because I agree, I think, it is trying to make it as equitable as possible. So that would be one thing. And I'm not sure, maybe to Councillor Payne through the chair, that's something you can start to work on in that role.
Got it.
That would be.
Got a meeting
So
on Monday.
just to respond to that, so I think that we can ask staff, Council Lockenberg, to have that conversation. As far as my understanding still goes, is that the money that Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism gets is only for outflow advertising. So that's always been the stick in the mud. What we've always wanted here was to get Nelson recognized as a resort municipality, which I think opened up the doors to using funding for other things besides outbound advertising. And we have, although we've brought that up many times, we haven't ever been lucky enough to get in the draw to be determined to be a resort municipality. And whether or not that's a value that we want to have, is also a debatable value. But that was one thing, but we can check. I'm sure that Ben can ask that question of her, but my understanding still is that the last time I talked to her is that the money is for outbound, and so it's it's not that she has ever said to me, and I would never spend it locally. I mean, she would love to. I mean, a lot of their projects, at least they're hiring local. They have the photographer in residence and that are local photographers, so we're capturing, at least from perhaps an economic standpoint, we're utilizing the wonderful skills that we have in Nelson, but in terms of actually having money to sort of fund, I still think that their hands are very much tied by the programming and the province. So, but that question can be asked without a doubt.
Yeah, and Mayor, just one of the things on that, I agree that there's some restrictions, and thank you for staff. You can ask the question. I think I would put it perhaps in the frame of what they did with the restaurants, the local restaurants, that there was money coming from Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism going into local restaurants via a marketing campaign. And so you were getting this sort of direct investment. We could do something with our cultural groups to incorporate them into marketing so that they start to maybe run an exhibit or do a performance that does have a tie out to a broader marketing campaigns. I think that approach might allow some of that money to flow in.
Just for some additional data for contemplation, I think if you were to do a 10% increase to those community groups, then you'd be looking at a 5.8% tax increase, just for some additional information.
Sorry, Chris, 10% to both. So
Yeah, if you
drop
drop that 24
Touchstones down to
something that was
something
more like a 10%, then instead of a 6.2, maybe you're down below 6 anyway, like 5.8. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's basically 30,000 savings.
Councillor Tate?
That's a great segue, because I heard your original question to be, where can we trim?
Right.
And we went straight down to those lines,
Yep.
which I think is fabulous. Thanks for finding that for us. But I would note that our own lines 43 and 44 are an 11% combined increase and 2/3 of our shortfall. And I'm just wondering if within ourselves, there's any trimming to be done. That's, there's some big jumps there. 241,000 and 163.
40.
Sorry, you said 43 and 44?
Yeah, so that's like our own in-house city expenses kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Like
so I
what
think
we
you're
do.
comparing the 22 actuals to the 2023, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So a large jump in that general admin and human resources was that digitization project
okay,
that just got postponed.
okay,
And that's being funded from the use of surplus,
okay.
from the use of
COVID
COVID recovery
release.
funds.
Okay.
Line 33, so if we drop down or postpone that digitization, we would also drop down the use of surplus, or COVID recovery funds.
Okay,
So it
so
would kind of be a wash.
for just, for how much?
I believe that was. For 2023, that was 220,000.
So that's how much has gone bumped over, 220,000
So 40, where are we?
of the 241? Like the, yeah, the two lines.
1704 would be, without that would be $220,000 less.
Okay, and then how about the line below it? That one's got a 163 increase. I did.
On the actual versus 2023 or between the two budget years?
Yeah, the actual, because I feel like we should look at our actuals. Should we just look at our budgets?
I
Look at the budget.
So
I look
part
at
of our
actuals when I
actual
do my
savings in 2022 was
Yes.
I know, because
of
the stuff
the
doesn't get.
CFO being gone for a few months and my position being, so we did have some savings there.
Okay,
And then, in addition, so some one-offs in 2023 was the OCP plan
yeah.
under that line, as well as.
Yeah, I mean,
We touched on it last week.
Yeah. So does that mean like there's nowhere to trim except those bottom three lines?
well,
I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
It feels a bit weird to be like, well, here's where we can look,
yeah.
and that's it.
I mean, we,
Well, no, it's not that, sorry, I just want to make it clear, so for the listening public,
To help me
it's
understand.
not, it's, I mean, we're down there looking at reducing those numbers, but it's just the fact that those numbers are numbers that we heard and that we don't automatically build in to the budget. That's all. It's not, we went down there to cut off our nose to spite our face versus trimming up here. It's just that because these come in during the way we do the budget process now.
Yeah.
So they're just, they're sort of additional. There's been years when they've gotten nothing, but I just in terms of, I know you didn't mean it, but when I heard the language, it was like, oh, we just went down to the last three people that came in and asked for money and we're gonna cut from them. But I mean, it is looking at the whole budget, but these asks have never, we've not looked at these budget numbers yet with these asks in. And that's why we have these groups come and ask. What's in here that we're not contemplating, and if you wanted to look, is that because the ask for the Visitors Information Center, and somebody asked to have the library pulled out the other day for something, I can't remember what it was, somebody asked for library numbers to come out, or be broken down a bit more. And what else is there that didn't, and the NAEDP, which is another group that we fund that isn't a, shall we say, a core city required operational process, they're already in here. They didn't ask for more,
Yeah.
but their amounts are in there.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
so there are other places we could give the NADPE 60,000 instead of 80,000, but we cut their money back a couple of years ago from 100,000. The Visitors Information Center, 10 years ago, we cut them back, and then for years we never gave them, and I think last year or the year before that, we gave them $2,000 more, right? So there are groups that are external to the actual core operations of it, but because they didn't ask for more, they're not showing up in additional community asks. Like
Because they're not additional.
they're not additional this year, but they've already been, they're in, and they're kind of an additional group. Like we don't have to fund the VIC, we don't have to fund the NAEDP, but I think we all appreciated the value of the work that they do. I mean, we value, I think, the work of the Visitors Information Center so that people get information and stay in our community longer, spend more money in our community. So there are some things that aren't core services. That's all I just want to point that out.
Okay, and I want to return to your question, which was where can we trim? And it sounds like there is nothing. I'm not hearing
Yeah.
a solution.
Yeah.
Can I just speak to that? Because I think it's what Chris just said. Policing's we have a 5.5% increase.
Yeah.
Policing's 3.3 of that.
Yeah.
So the total rest of our operations, parks, public works, fire, emergency services, your finance staff, your general admin, library, all the rest is 2.2% when we're running 6.75% inflation.
Yeah.
So we have gone through these budgets and, you know, I would say we're at some risk of not meeting our budget. Just, you know, we don't know where some of these material and services supply contracts are going to play out. So, you know, Chris and Amy have met with every department and looked at where, you know, where they could put a minimum amount to try to manage this tax increase. And we, in my opinion, unless you want to cut services somewhere, then I think we're at the minimum. In fact, I think we're probably being quite risky that we haven't, you know, increased expenditures enough to, you know, to come in on budget. This year was, you know, we actually ran a deficit in 2022. So, yeah, we run a lean organization here. We have demands from every single department here. I think you've heard every one of them present. And there is no department here that is padding their budgets, operating at staffing levels that are higher than the bare minimum. I think every single person that's come into this organization is, you know, picks that up. You know, you guys staff, you know, at the minimum levels. And so, and we're starting to, you know, that's when we start to see, you know, some of our maintenance isn't, you know, where it is, you know, our tree maintenance, you know, some of the pathways, you know, I think you walked around where, you know, there's weeds growing everywhere. And so, we're stretched. We've added, you know, significant new residents. You know, you hear that from policing. You know, you guys have all these new residents and you're not increasing policing. Well, we haven't increased. We've added parks, we've added trails. We really haven't increased that park staff. You know, Charlie Henderson came in and he looked at that and he said, I'm going to make this work within the staffing levels I have. He's looking at making, you know, how we use that staff better. But I can tell you that's, we don't have fat in this organization, and our, you know, collective agreement increases are more than 2.2%.
So that is the answer to your question then, because you said where can we trim, and you just said we have no fat.
I don't believe we have any fat here.
But you always have to ask the question.
I sure do.
And so
It's a fair question to ask.
it's like, because I asked the question, because we end up always, year after year, we end up at the bottom of the page. This is always presented in the same organizational structure, so we always end up at the bottom of the page. And part of that, while we tried to maintain taxes, the council of the day made the decisions that there was some years that the people at the bottom of the page got no increases. So in part, reflecting back on what Councillor Payne with the graph is showing, is because there was those zeros, and in those years it wasn't just the museum that got zeros. All of those groups got zeros, including the NAEDP and the VIC and the Capital and the and just, I guess, just for those that are new, the 2022 tax increase was 4%, just so you know what we did. And we've got the numbers there, but we don't have a number at the top of the page that tells you what we did, but it was 2022 and 4% in 2022. And we did manage to, and maybe that's the rooster that's coming home to roost, is in that time period, we did during COVID give a 0. And we all took a 0. So excluded staff got no increase. Counselors got no increase that year. And we gave the people no increase in taxation. And maybe it should have been as little as 1%, but you know what I mean? Because every 1% just keeps you kind of moving on. But nobody had the crystal ball that said that suddenly we were going to have 8% inflation.
I just make a couple comments, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, those groups came and presented at a cow and had an additional ask, and so you couldn't make a decision at that time, so this is just that decision, like, what do you want to do? They've asked for some money, so it's we're asking the question as part of this budget, but that's kind of what the question is. As far as like trimming the fat, we've had, I don't know, maybe 8 meetings here as a group. We've probably had 30 meetings internally looking at the budget with every single department multiple times. What's the staffing levels? What are the commitments we have as far as collective agreements? Getting people to hold firm on travel and training and not adding inflation to those types of things, and do more courses online, that type of thing. So everybody's really dug in and been flexible and tried not to put anything more in there than what they can live with. It's tough with protective services and fire and things like that. They have safety needs, and you do need to build that in. But with, as far as here and general admin, I mean, everybody's been extremely easy to work with and to try and make those sacrifices. So there's no contingency built into here that we could just say, like, well, I tucked away $100,000, we'll just pull from that. It's not in here. This is what we need to maintain the status quo of what we have. This is the baseline.
So I've got Woodward, Lockenberg, Page.
Can I just maybe say, so the 6% on $1,800 is $108 a year, which is $9 a month. That's on that average house. That's what we're asking for, even with the 6%.
Is it 6.2 or was it 6?
I use 6, assuming the 10%,
Yeah, if we were to drop
6.2,
that.
I think.
and I think you said 5.8.
Yeah, I just
5 and
dropped it out,
6.2.
but maybe it's closer to 6. Yeah.
That's good.
So, it's okay, Mayor?
Yep.
So
Yep,
I
you're
just,
right.
as I'm hearing the discussion, I just think that something we should consider as council too, is that when if we're trimming, and we're stretching things out to the maximum, that has costs. That's stress levels in our staffing. That's maintenance maybe that's not happening on our rolling fleet. I mean, there's a bunch of things that happen when we do that. So, and I would just say maybe it's reflective of our own, all of us, community's own personal finances. If you actually are on the wire at all times, it's totally exhausting and highly stressful. So, having a very fair tax rate is extremely important, but also not, grinding it down to the absolute minimum, because that will come back at a later date and can cause us a lot of grief and issues. So trying to find that sweet spot, I think, really is, for me, over the years here, seems to be like the most healthy way as a community as a whole, rather than trying to find those, grinding every single little piece down to the bare minimum. So that's just a comment in general.
Three quick things. The first is on that increase to touchstones, the decrease in our relative contribution to touchstones. I think that's a bit misleading because the costs or the operating budget of touchstones increased pretty dramatically. So it's not like we decreased significantly our contribution, it's that the costs increased, and so our relative contribution looked like it was falling down. So I think I just wanted to put that out there to clarify. The second thing was Chris, for you then, the question on the 0%, 4%, 3% over, if we did 6.2, what's that look like in terms of the future tax increases? Obviously, that would change, wouldn't it not? Like, we're not talking about 4% in 2024 then.
And you're talking about with funding those.
Yeah, like
community
if we did say as the CAO said 6.2 this year, what would it look like 2024 and beyond?
I think if you were,
Could be almost.
yeah, I think you were funding all the groups down there, it should,
Should be-
kind of look.
get to
the
zero.
Same, right? Yeah.
Oh,
The 433,
it would still look the same, 433?
Yeah, 'cause
Even
you're-
though,
432.
Because those, you're trying to fund the asks in the current year, and then those are flat going forward. So you've already sort of funded that piece.
right,
this year.
there's no sort of like kind of down payment on anything that we don't have to then fund in the future with that. Okay, that makes sense. So we're still looking at 432. And then, so is there any opportunity to do somehow sort of defer some of this to get a bit more smoothing? So going to say 5 and then 4, 3, 3, 3 or something like that? Is there anything to be done there to smooth it a bit?
I mean, you could do things, and you're right, all it does is push it to the subsequent year, but
Yeah.
it does smooth it, is to say, is there a certain aspect of this that you'd fund from surplus, which means you do have to catch up the
Yeah.
following year, but it does smooth things a little bit. So say like lower in the current year, but increase in the subsequent year.
Yeah.
That
And
would
then,
be the impact.
and then from surplus,
Yeah.
are we, if I'm remembering from the last budget meeting, our surplus was looking pretty healthy.
Yeah,
And
the
so-
opening surplus we had was 5.4, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So maybe a bit from surplus there could smooth this out a bit, and we wouldn't be being irresponsible in that.
Yep.
That'd be pretty, okay. That helps. Thanks.
And I'm at page.
I always want to be aggressive with building our reserves more than, I just think comes up fairly often, just having spent that time at recreation and seeing what happened there. Trying to dig yourself out of a lack of reserves later is very, very, very difficult. We've had a lot of discussion around the trimming part, the expense part, and I actually just think for this moment, we want to cast ourselves up into our strat plan and then into what 2024, what this will look like when we're at this table in 1 year's time. And specifically around the projects that we give direction to staff around revenue generation. We've had conversations about, and some of those pieces, of course, are when new buildings are brought into the city, like when we bring new tax base, that increases our revenue and gives us the ability to spread this cost out. The MRDT can be used to invest in affordable housing. So service agreements with our destination marketer. The marketing destination tourism, I don't know what the R stands for. But
Municipal Regional District Tax. I
is
pay
that what it is? Okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
RDT.
So
2%,
you're
I
allowed
pay.
to spend it on tourism marketing programs or projects, and projects can be capital projects, which will be given special consideration when they're part of the designate's 5-year strategic plan. So there are ways that money can be spent above and beyond, and maybe we want to we're doing it at 2%. It can go up to 3%. There's another 1% there. It has been identified previously that could be directed to affordable housing opportunities, but it could also be through some sort of shared use agreement or shared service agreement with the tourism marketing, part of a larger program to invest in everything from community event spaces throughout the district and the catchment, including the city of Nelson. But we can look at how we can open up that revenue opportunity. The 5th floor revenue opportunity. So I just want us to kind of keep that lens on as we go forward, and where are some of these places that we can bring in more revenue to supplement all the great programming expenses that we're doing, because I think that's where we're going to find a little bit more purchase. And we've been fairly innovative in a number of ways at looking to some of our waste programming to see how can we generate revenue there too. And we've talked about fees, of course, so there's another opportunity as well. But when we're giving marching orders, I think as we go through strat planning is where are some of those priorities coming up that are going to bring new money in or more money in versus, new programming.
Mayor, just a question for Councilor Page on that. So in the DMRT, it says in 2018, the provincial budget, affordable housing was added as a permissible use of funds. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah,
Like it's
that's one of
explicit.
the ways you can spend it.
And then you also said programs. I
Yeah.
didn't see what, it seems pretty broad definition of programs, but could that be?
They must increase local tourism revenue, visitation, and have economic benefits.
So both capital and the civic, or capital and
I think you could
touchstones
probably
do.
frame something
Yeah, okay.
potentially, but I think it needs work and we need to
Yep.
look at it closer. And we need to get the buy-in from their board,
Sure, yeah. Great, thanks.
but.
I'm on,
Oh, sorry, Mayor, just another question for Councilor Page on this. The 3% on that, the 2 to 3.5%, who
can't be as much as 3%.
makes that call?
Provincial tax, you have to.
Do we
apply.
decide that?
We passed that.
We pass that.
No, you have to go up to the hotel, or the participants, they have to agree to it.
They have to agree to it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And, yeah. That puts me even more likely to be out of business. But, no, the businesses have to decide. That's how they decided the last time. And three is the max, but, a number of smaller communities that have the NRDE, have it at 2%. Councillor Pinero, you haven't had a chance, so please join.
I don't have any.
Oh, you don't have a question? Oh, I thought you did have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Don't move.
Sold.
Can I throw out some more data?
Sure.
Just like on the fly kind of thing here. If
Can I
Oh,
just
no.
ask
Oh,
for
yeah,
clarification?
absolutely, sure.
Sorry, there's just a couple of things. I'm trying to understand how some of these revenues match up with their expenses, and a couple of the ones that I am interested in, and I assume the campground has a revenue as well as an expense. Am I missing that? Or is it just not broken out?
It's just not broken out.
Yeah,
It's
Okay.
it would be-
within line 15.
And the same with the farmer's market? Like $80,000 to run a farmer's market? Is there an revenue associated with that, or is that just a public good?
No, there's revenue, which is, I think it's in the sale of services. See if I can find the campground, or the, Amy's gonna be too. I'm sure.
Yeah, sorry,
So the
just-
Grace is on.
There you go.
2023 is estimated 71,200 for revenue.
Yeah, I got about 5 minutes.
okay, and, the campground?
Sorry.
Campground,
Yeah, there's gonna be a few lines for that one. But.
Okay. Like, I'm just trying to think, how close are they, and should they be revenue neutral? I know they're not big amounts, I'm just trying to understand.
Well, we have heard in the cow that it is for profit, the farmer's market, so it would be good maybe to be able to show those numbers in a public meeting as well, if it's easy to pull out.
Yeah,
Because I
Because if
think we've
we're-
heard that out loud.
but if our expenses are 80 and our income is 71,
Right, but it wasn't showing until you brought it up. So that, I think that's really valuable information. Thank you.
okay. And I know last year was a little bit weird, because I mean, the Mother's Day plant starter event, that was just for everyone who attended a bit of a disaster. You needed to have your parka on and your mitts to buy your starts.
Yeah, that one's done, I know in other years it's done quite well, and it really just
Yeah,
depends, yeah.
yeah, no, it's been spectacular. I go every year. I love it. And the youth center, I presume that is just an expense of the public good.
No, they bring in,
They
youth camp revenues, they
Okay,
bring in.
so
you know,
there's an amount offsetting that 295, no, wait a minute, $295,000.
quite a few lines that
Okay.
they bring in for those kinds of activities. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm on the same page as whomever said, we understand that everyone is doing a spectacular job of trying to, I'll use the same term, trim the fat and I would using our resources wisely personally, but the other side of that in any budget is the revenue stream. So even though taxes are the most significant part of that revenue stream, there must be some other things here that could be examined to add incremental amounts that would save even 0.5% of
Yeah.
taxes, or to take that 0.5% and put it specifically, into climate change or into infrastructure, because I think it's something that I've seen on other municipalities' taxes, is that they've had a tax increase and then a 1% or something directed to, I think, infrastructure is what I've seen. That makes it really clear to the public that there's an operational component, but there is this, we have facilities out there and we need to make sure.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the large revenue sources we have, I mean, there's parking, and all of that goes into the capital projects reserve so that we can do paving and that type of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So even increasing the revenues there does increase a transfer to the reserve, but it doesn't sort of fund our general operations. So, we've got that.
So
We've
we're
got-
constrained by one of our governing documents that it all has to go there?
I think it's great that, we have a revenue source to fund that capital replacement plan.
And I would, as we talked about in this year's budget, we identify that as transportation, all transportation, not, we traditionally called it paving, but it's funding sidewalks, it's funding.
Active transportation.
Right. So I think you look at that, and I think if anything, we're not being able to fund all our transportation needs, right? So we'd probably be looking at that if there was an increase in that, that would allow us to fund, additional transportation type projects.
So that's off the table.
Yeah.
I'll just put a little X beside that.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of small line items in here, like there's little things that, could we try and get another 5,000 out of here and 5,000 out of there? And we do. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just a budget. We're gonna be over on some, we're gonna be under on some.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah, no, I do, I get that.
putting something together that we think looks reasonable, and hopefully is achievable. And,
Below inflation.
yeah.
Well, I think the other thing that Chris probably pointed out, right, probably the first meeting was, because our taxation, because we generate so much other revenues, when those don't
Yeah.
go up with, our costs, that means taxation has to pick up that shortfall. So if the cost goes up $100 and that other revenue doesn't go up, then that whole $100 has to be funded by taxation. And that's, we are quite entrepreneurial in terms of the revenues that we generate. So, but those don't necessarily all go up with that, with inflation. And a lot of the provincial government grants have not gone up with inflation. In fact, I think the small community grant is dropping as our population increases, right? So, so we face these kind of revenue streams that don't grow at the, the same level as our expenditures.
And are there services that we need to, re-examine the level at which we provide?
And that would be you had every department present to you, and that would be a good strat planning
Okay.
discussion that you would have. Are we spending too much money on parks? Are we spending too much money on, fire is a good example, in emergency management. Like, this budget includes hiring that additional staff member who is writing grants, who is getting, getting those, big projects done, that aren't shown up as expenditures on this side. So we kind of have part of the expenditure there, but we don't really recognize the revenue because it's uncertain at this time. So some of them, you just don't necessarily have all that matching. The whole climate change team, right? The food cycler grants they've got in, and et cetera, or the grants to to advance the energy retrofit. All those things are sort of not shown as revenues. They're actually advancing other projects. So that's just the nature of local government, right?
Yep, no, I get that.
So I just as my, on the fly spreadsheet type of work here, if you did do that 10%, and just going back to that 10% increase for those not-for-profit groups, you could do a 5.5 in 2023 and a 4.5 in 2024 to shift some of that and smooth it a little bit, so you're not having that, if that was, that was on.
Sorry, say that again, please, sorry.
Sorry,
5.5 now, and then what in 2024?
4.5 with the 10% increase for those not-for-profits, rather than having, a 6 and a 4 type of thing. You can,
And because it's budget, it's all sort of speculative.
yeah, and
I mean, budget, I always like to say, budget is the best guess, given the current circumstances.
a year from now, the world could look totally different, and
Well, and that's the problem, isn't it, in terms of a year from now, because we don't really know where inflation's gonna go or where other things are gonna go. And I don't think in terms of personal, people's personal situation in the world hasn't landed yet. And I think one of the things that we do generate a lot of money from is actually the work from the planning department, and that is in the new builds and all the renovations and things. And, is that slowing down any, because that could have a fairly large dent in what our revenue is, because that is something that we get. The planning department does make us money in terms of the fact of what comes in. And if building permits should be cut in half, that could have a significant impact. And I know you want to talk, but I'm just wondering, I will let you go, but I'm also thinking, could we have now 12-minute break to 3:30, just so that we can contemplate? I mean, we don't have to make a final decision, but it's nice to send the finance team away at this point with the number, or if we have two numbers that we kind of like, and they can then come back, so the next time we see them, we have the spreadsheet with the 5-year forecast, okay, it's not locked in stone, the 5-year forecast going out, so that they can go away and have something to work on. Because if we leave them with nothing, this is what we're gonna come back to exactly this when we come back. So can we take 10 minutes?
Do we need a motion or just go?
I ate that pizza cold, but it was only.
The MRDT. So,
Had a chance to stretch and think and celebrate. And so I'm just sort of thinking, so the average, so the per year
just
is
put this back up again.
110. So that's
you
gonna be
email that to us,
330 for my house.
Have the newest.
Yep, sure, yep,
Thank you. I love it. It's beautiful.
I made it, thanks.
You did this one all by yourself without.
Okay,
I was proud of the house that grows a little bit. I thought,
No, that's all.
Is that from Creative Commons or?
where'd I?
Came by my office to show
Does it grow relative? Is it a relative?
Oh, it's scale, at scale.
Every year it'll be the same, probably.
okay, so I'm just gonna throw something out there, because it's not been a particularly long day, but there's still like, isn't it nice? Like, I've actually been trying to diarize, off of my phone, what the sunrise sunset is. Like, I haven't done it for a few days yet, but in terms of how fast it is from December. So I've got a few scattered dates through each month, looking at the fact that, and it wasn't that long ago that at 3:33 we'd be sitting in the dark. So, and I see that they're trying to bring back through Congress yet again the Sunshine Act in the United States to hopefully never turn the clocks back. So we can only hope that the government will, seeing as how it was the best bipartite response that they had ever gotten here in British Columbia about not changing the time. Maybe there's hope yet for us next week. But I'm going to try to summarize that we've all talked about things. We've looked. We've contemplated changes, what we could improve. I've heard a couple of things, and because this isn't the final budget, and what we're going to do here at this point is just give some general direction back to staff, because they just need to know where to go. So politely where to go. So what I'm contemplating here is because we don't know what it looks like when we go out the 5 years. And now that we've had the look at like 0 and we can see this, I'm thinking that what I'd like to see come back, and people can agree or not agree in terms of the direction we want to give staff, is that we ask them to come back with one of these sheets that looks at the 6.2, so we can see what it looks like and what happens when we roll it out. And to come back with what I hear a more comfort level around perhaps the 5.9 or the 8, whatever the number is when we look at 10% for the Nelson Museum and Art Gallery. So I see those as 2 because I heard a lot about like let's make it 10 for both. That's probably something that there's a comfort level around the table. Not perfect, but a comfort level. So let's see what the 5-year looks like using that. And let's see what the 5-year looks like all in. And I don't think there's a flavor for looking at what it looks like with all of the community asks out. I did not hear that. I did not hear that we were gonna go zeros on community asks, so I think that that's not an exercise worth pursuing unless I hear otherwise. So I would be looking at all in, and then with looking at the 10% for each of the Capitol Theatre and the Nelson Museum and Art Gallery. Should we have some discussion around that? Because we're not making the final decision here, but we do need to give some direction to staff at this juncture.
Mayor, on the revenue side, I'm wondering if we can give some direction to staff to explore the 2 things that sort of didn't come up before we broke, which was, and maybe this is a question too, I know we're talking about the sale of some of our land, and I know those are pretty prescribed in terms of where the use of funds, but would that have some sort of effect on reserves that would allow us to diminish our contribution to reserves, which would then sort of free up some money on our operational budget? And
What taxation is still going into reserves from these budgets?
Well, there's a block there, the total amount, you mean?
Yeah, no, but taxation as opposed to, the capital reserve, and anyway, we can look at that.
I mean, yeah, land, it needs to go into a land sale reserve and then would need to be used for, it can be used for capital. Do you then reduce the amount that you're putting into reserves, and then do you ever pick that up again? And when you do pick that up, then you gotta have your tax increase in the year that you decide to
We
put more into
strongly,
those reserves. So,
sure, yeah.
and
we
it's-
strongly
yeah.
advise against using one-off revenues to,
For operations.
yeah, or fund
Well,
reserves, because they're they're one-time things. All you're delaying is a decision.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I am thinking of it in the terms of rate smoothing. The one-off allows you
Could
to
do it.
take a 6% or 5 point down to 3, say, and then it kind of is more consistent with 3 over time. Just a question to explore that, because we didn't talk about it, and I'm not sure if it was considered in terms of that effect.
I would recommend keeping your reserves contributions consistent and, year after year, and maybe increase them. If you get more parking revenue, then more goes into capital projects. But if there is some room to, and we have done that, looked at, these kind of one-off expenses and said, we got that 5.4 million of surplus, let's use that instead to fund those pieces. So that might be where your flexibility is. And so if we were gonna do some smoothing, that's probably what I would look to do, is to say, hey, is there some other things in here that maybe we could say, let's use surplus for that in this year, and then that would put a little bit more pressure on next year, but reduce the impact this year.
The impact this year. And then related to that, though, just as a question back to the land sale reserve and some of the, do we have this sort of like every 3 years we know we're probably going to dispose of some other piece of land, or aren't these sort of one-offs?
These are
And in that case, wouldn't you use them to reduce a sort of a bigger sort of hit to the
Well, we
the
would,
tax?
we would recommend, and what we've done over a number of years is use that money strategically. You know, you're selling one asset,
Yeah,
invest it in another asset,
I see.
right? So like, you know, Councillor Page mentioned, you know, how do we generate some additional revenues? You know, one of the things that we will look at is, you know, what is the cost of the renovation of the 5th floor if we move there and we could turn, you know, this floor into
that's-
rental revenue. So now we use that to, you know, create an ongoing
Yeah.
revenue stream, right?
Yeah, well, that's good, and I get that that'll just show up as a sort of a windfall in future years. We're not going to sort of budget for that because it's
Right.
unknown.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that that's there. And then the final sort of thing I'll say on this is on the MRDT. I would like staff to consider. I think we figured out that's $1 million, and if it goes to 3%, it's $1.5 million. So that's a significant amount of money that comes in from the MRDT, and the contribution to capital touchstones as well as line 45 and our cultural investments. To me, those things should be seeing a contribution from that MRDT for sure, because they do provide a marketing benefit. They provide all sorts of other benefits that do seem to qualify. And that would have an ongoing impact in terms of our contributions. One, a little bit more can go to them, and we can probably reduce some of our contribution as well.
I guess-
In addition to affordable housing too, which would be a major opportunity as well. So,
Yeah, I think probably, you know, inviting Diana to have a conversation and, you know, how are they using that funding now? What is the appetite? Maybe not just Diana. I don't know who the chair of the organization or whatever I'm not sure what it's called anymore. Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism, I guess.
Yeah.
Board, you know, maybe having them, you know, having us sit down with them and think first, you know, what's your plans?
Yeah.
You know, what's your appetite? You know, how do you see the value? Because I think one thing they say is they do market our cultural assets, right? And so I think they would probably say we do contribute. You know, they don't have to do their own marketing. We do a lot of marketing to, you know, for those facilities. But
okay.
you know, I think it's worthwhile, you know, saying here's, you know,
It's a pretty significant amount of money, and there's room potentially to go to 3%. And I think affordable housing is a priority and should probably get a big chunk of that. But even like, you know, 20,000 to the Nelson Museum and Archives would be a big bonus for them that might make a difference. So, all that being said, the 10% mayor and the 10% seems right to me, and otherwise, yeah, if we could bring it down beyond 5.8,
I think.
I think it's 5.8 to 10%.
I mean, it's high, but I guess I'd have a comfort on that. But I'd love to see
Yeah,
some
and again, I
reserve
think
and smooth it
just-
out a bit. 4.9 and then a little smoother out over the next year.
4.9?
4.99. I mean, if we could do the reserve
People
contribution.
people look at what their taxes go up
Dollar
at
amount
the
is fair
end
enough.
of the day.
Yeah, fair enough.
I do, when you look at these numbers though, you do see a lot of, you know, 8.9,
Right.
you know, 9.57, you know, yeah,
Vancouver's 10,
there's some
right?
strategy there.
Councillor Woodward.
I just want to reiterate, I really hope that we can land on a number where we're not stressing the system so much so that there'll be spin-off problems, right? We want to have enough funding to get us through so we're not just scrambling all the time. Just considering we're always trying to, you know, be looking ahead and planning for what's coming, and part of that is having some resilience in the system, so it's not just down to the wire. So I really hope that whatever we do, that we're not just down to the wire, because that doesn't feel like a good place to be.
Tons of reserves.
Thank you.
Age.
I have a comfort level with the scenarios, and I'll look to see the final numbers when they're brought to us, as outlined. Previously, I did, just pinged by that comment, wanted to reiterate that conversation about developing a development services reserve of some sort. Like, at some point, we know those numbers are gonna trail off. That's expected. It happens. We talk about it here. Other councils talk about it all the time. But if there's any way we can create a reserve for that purpose, understanding that it's not always a boom time, and just to even out the planning that goes on in that department, because many of the projects there live across multiple years. And if we have all that inertia and all that programming, and it just happens to be a bad development year, I think that's a place we do want to make sure we've got some buffer.
So we do that. So if we get some permits come in at the beginning of a project and it's a multi-year project, we allocate those revenues over the course of the project. So we don't recognize it all in that year up front, and then they still got to do the work in 2023 and 2024. We defer the revenue over the period of that project. So there is some smoothing there in that regard.
Okay.
And that's how you would do it from an accounting perspective, is to match this cost with the revenue.
Okay.
So we do that. Yeah.
I think we've been in the $300,000-400,000 range annually.
Which is a couple staff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we don't expect that we're gonna have zero development. It's just these larger projects are only have so many capacity, although, you know, that seems to be what we're, kind of the projects we're seeing. If these multifamily go ahead, they're all larger projects.
So I'd see some coats and jackets and things happening. Can I just?
I know, I'm sorry, I have
It's all good.
4 o'clock cut off.
Okay,
Yeah, no, and I would, you know, the sun's out there. I just want to, so just as far as direction for us, we'll put together a couple scenarios. This gives you a bit of time to sort of, you know, absorb some of these amounts. I can't see the next meeting being, you know, hours. Is there a way that we might be able to tack it on to the front of a next council meeting or something like that? I could see, you know, here's some scenarios. As far as next steps, you know, we still want to plan for an open house, which will be a presentation that'll have, you know, hey, here's the budget, here's the recommended tax increase. So there's that piece, get some feedback from the public. And then there's also, then would move to a subsequent meeting as far as doing first 3 readings of a financial plan. So there's still a couple of steps down the road. Whatever kind of direction you give us is not something that shows up on a bylaw next meeting, so. That's right.
Boom.
Sure hope CEO McClure comes and asks lots of tough questions.
I'm being a little facetious, but it would be nice if, you know, Chris and Amy have spent a lot of time on budget, and it'd be nice to be able to wrap this up and get, you know, get them back doing other things like the year end that we have to do. So the small municipalities that we have to do. So you know, if people are, you know, we'll run those. If you're comfortable, then I would say let's move ahead, get those financial bylaws done, and get this thing wrapped up.
Yeah, we have many other things.
So that's the 14th.
Would that be something, we could, I don't know, maybe, sorry, you guys were in charge of the
Is there
calendar.
anything else
Motion to
scheduled
move
that day?
this to the next.
no, you don't have to make it, I'm just trying to strategize to my head in terms of like the next week's meeting and how it's, laid out, cause one of the things next week's meeting is well, we don't
2
need to
weeks.
make
2 weeks.
Like,
So
We have a meeting
the
next week.
14th?
14th is a regular meeting.
or
Yeah.
whatever, so yeah, 2 weeks.
But
So
we
it's
were-
11
okay,
days.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out
What's the
where it
plan?
goes, so would we be passing, you're thinking that we would pass the motion as to what we see the budget increases, or we would have further,
I would think you
discussion?
would just give me direction to, you know, what sort of a tax
Prepare the
increase
financial
to,
plan.
yeah, like this, and to do an open house, and that, you know, to present a recommended tax increase of X.
okay, so that could be in the business meeting part, or does that have to be like,
It can,
do we have a workshop that day?
we can do, no, we don't start at 2:30, we're starting.
No, at 4:30, the 4:30
We
education
could-
session.
We could easily put it in.
Just who else do we have there? Do we have
Not-
anybody yet?
Not for the education. Right.
Bump them, whoever it is, bump them.
Yeah, and you know, we can do that too.
So I'm sort of thinking at the 4:30 because because of the fact, I mean, it is gonna be in a business meeting, so it is business. I mean, it's not like excluded from giving direction, but
We don't have anything
yeah, you could be our workshop.
for the workshop.
So you'd have 15 minutes with 15 minutes of questions so we can get to dinner early.
You guys would have 15 minutes.
Whoa.
I mean, you probably in your minds already sort of know what this looks like, and it's really just letting it sit
Yeah.
over the weekend while
Yeah, and so as soon as, like, I mean, because you guys aren't gonna have to change that many things, you guys just run those numbers. You can send this out to us as soon as you have it,
we could do that next week.
Done.
Have it, Yep.
and then we
So
can
the
just have
questions
some, so the education can be around process. So one of the part of what I would see there in terms of is just to summarize how we got to where we are, so that we've done utilities, hydro, because of the dates of when we do things. Now we've done capital, and now we're doing operating, and it's operating that's what creates the tax requirement, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, just so there's a little bit of background, not that we're looking here and going, oh yeah, 7, yeah, go away, get 7, get the bylaw going, but yeah.
Okay.
So where we've been, for all of those who haven't paid any attention to all of these meetings, they'll get a 10-second summary. 10-minute summary, I guess.
Sounds good.
So is everybody comfortable with that? Or if there's a comfort level for just go away and come back with a number, I mean, I'm good with that too, but I kind of thought maybe we will just want to see sort of what that 0.5% difference looks like. So, which I always like to see, because I'm a numbers person. I like to see that difference, but
I don't know about everybody else, but quite honestly, I'm comfortable with the 10% and wherever it's gonna land under 6 already. And I know people wanna look at the numbers but I don't think much is gonna change. I'm ready now to just accept that.
I'm okay too. I think that the difference might be just, is there a contribution from reserves or not? Like, that would be the only.
Smooth it.
To smooth it.
So if you look at what.
To me, that's the only thing that's.
That's up there, so 5.5 is $101 a year, 6 is 110, 5 is 92. So if you smooth it, you might save $9 a year.
A year.
Yeah.
So less than $1 a month.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a certain.
And I would leave the reserves alone. I just wouldn't use them to do that smoothing.
Because we really have kind of broken it. There's only like a couple of tiny shifts we can do. We know what those are. So, I mean, I think
Big ones we've already kind of agreed
kind of
to.
covered that too. And then, so if we can get it under 6, something around 5.8, 5.9, I feel like there's not much more you can do. So,
When you have police at 3.3,
Yeah.
that's the majority of that 5.8.
I would only say this, because otherwise I'm fine. The number doesn't seem that significant. However, people do look at that percentage. Like, that's really where their eyes go, and then their entire perception of the value they get out of government kind of revolves around that number. And as much as that's a relatively small number on a per taxpayer basis, also the 100,000 sort of shift from reserves is also a relatively small number. If we're talking about a $5.5 million reserve, then it's 5.4 million after that shift happens. So it's also not that significant. But the public perception, given that we're also kind of in the game of maintaining a certain political goodwill so that we can do hard things, it might be a good investment on that respect. That's all.
but again, these are tiny little bits of the margin, right? Like the actual.
On both sides, though, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And what, given that it's relatively small on both sides, it's ultimately going to come from the taxpayer one way or the other. The question is, what is the best path, strategically, what's the best path forward? I know we've got a lot of hard decisions ahead of us. We need to maintain a certain amount of goodwill in the public. And if that difference between 5.5 and 4.9 is potentially pretty significant in people's minds, they're like, that's a big deal, then it might be worth the relatively small shift from reserves to make that happen. Otherwise, I'm with you guys. Like, I have a comfort level. I think our staff's great. You guys have always do a really good job at coming up with a plan that works. At this point now, it does seem to be a political decision about where do we put that number. I'm kind of feeling it's a smarter investment to go 4.9. Maybe operationally within the corporation, it's a smarter deal to preserve the reserve, that extra 100,000.
Sorry, did you say 4.9?
Yeah, like I'd like to see it
Okay.
come down to 4.9 would be, to me, feels better, especially when you just know the stories that are going to be in the media. They're going to compare us to everybody else and which normally I don't care about generally, but I just think in terms of maintaining some goodwill to then do active transportation in Rosemont and all these other things, maybe it's worth it.
Well, I think that, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I'm thinking that we also are gonna, some of those things we're pursuing, grants to do the work, so we're not using taxation, and I guess in my head, and maybe I've got this wrong and the CFO can tell me something different, it's just that in the course of the year, if we get into the middle of the year and we're having financial difficulty with this budget that we've set for taxation, is that we will be turning to reserves to help smooth then. And so if I start off the year by using reserves to decrease the taxation, and I get into trouble and I gotta go back to the reserves to keep us somewhere in the realm of paying all the bills, that's not telling me that I'm gonna be able to charge, like, I'm gonna be charging potentially even more in the next year, just because
Bring it back up.
to bring it back up, not even talking about the reserves, it's just the fact that if I couldn't do operations and I needed to go to reserves to have operations, that tells me operations cost more. So then I'm gonna have to tax more for basic operations in the next year, regardless of whether or not, like we've done that with the snow. I mean, and, snow's one of those, snow's always a bad example, but, we did that with snow where we had to go in the reserves to pay for the snow, right? So we were able to do that. So that's my thing is about, instead of using the reserves at the front end, knowing that we do have reserves, that in an emergency, we can use reserves and then hopefully be able to stay the course in the next financial year, because hopefully the whatever it was a one-off, say like snow, right? And then you're not sort of dipping, because you cut so close to the bone to start with that you're always going in to the emergency fund to be able to go forward. And then you realize when you try to do the budget the next year that, you were so far out that now it's even worse.
Yeah.
So,
Heard before that one of our most finite resources is our staff capacity. It's not our financial capacity, our logistics. And I just think there's value if we can wrestle this in a moment and get that clarity now. It just clears the way for everybody else who's coming in on Monday to just keep trucking on to the next amount of work. So I think if we could pass a motion, if we need a motion here, or just get the direction, I say if it's under 6, then
we'll do the 10 so that it's not just like, just make it 5.99 recurring for some arbitrary.
pull back the 10%.
So when we do the 10%, so that's what we want to see. We want to see the calculation then at the 10 and 10.
Yeah.
Councillor Payne.
Do 10% for those groups then.
Those community
I'm
asks,
full,
yeah.
Yeah, so one document to come back, we'll do it as a workshop at the front end, just so we can then give direction for them to go off to make the bylaws and set up the public meeting and whatever at the beginning of the meeting on the 14th. There'll be the educational information session at the start of the next council meeting.
We're all gonna be there anyway.
I do.
Yeah, I do have a question, okay.
I don't know that it's a question so much. I just want to say, I think the decision around the 10, I think we're making it without insufficient information. But if that's the way the majority wants to go, then I will work with that. I think there's better ways to do that math to make it a little more equitable between the different organizations. Is it worth the time of staff to do it, considering the amounts? Maybe not. But the thing I do want to say is that this is a time when bold decisions need to be made. So when we're talking about political will and how we present this and how people will be sensitive, and you guys have been here as these amounts have come out, whether they've been 0s or 2s, we're making decisions for people who are paying their tax bills this year. And I understand that because we're all paying our bills this year. But we're also making decisions for people who will be paying their tax bills for the next several decades. I think that's a really important thing to consider. It's not just the $9 extra a year for this year. When things are tight for everybody, I am highly sensitive to that. But I really think we need to consider, can we be bold to make decisions for the next generation of taxpayers? So that's it.
So then, when you, so you need to finish that. So when you say that, could you tell me what your number is? Like, I'm sorry, I'm a number person, so
Yeah.
do you think maybe it should be 7? I mean,
Maybe it should be.
okay, I just wanted,
Yep.
yeah.
I'm saying that, I can imagine the media going, Councillor Payne wants to raise taxes and, hurt us all. I would go for a marketing twist there. The pain is coming. But on the other hand, yeah, I think we are sort of pussyfooting around some of these issues. Is there going to be a good time to do that if we don't start now?
I just want to bring it back to what I said earlier of like over the strat planning process.
Yeah.
Over the next year is really giving that direction to focus on those projects that'll bring those other revenue streams online. And that's where we're going to have that positive impact. And if we do the service agreement conversation and get into a values conversation, then we can set up a framework for the future on something equitable for those organizations, as well as other ways that we might find additional revenues to make those investments. I think that's just to take away and prepare for those conversations into our next budget season is where I would land that. Because right now, two existing asks coming forward, putting them both at the same inflationary increase, to me, seems the fairest way of dealing with it without chugging a ton of staff time into trying to come up with a new model while this whole service agreement conversation is still happening.
And bold
And I do.
moves have costs.
For
Well,
for
they have-
now
they have-
and future opportunity costs.
Well, I'm just saying, you do bold moves, you could be hampering yourself for other things that you want to do at a later date.
We could be,
That's-
but we don't know that either.
And-
Or we could be missing an opportunity to grasp the moment. We don't know. We need to reflect our values in how we spend our money, and that may happen for the next budget at the strategic planning, but I just need to put that out there because I am looking in the long range. I'm not here to get elected next time. I'm here to make decisions today that will impact the future in a very positive way for everybody, and that's not my election speech either, sorry.
Well, and Mayor, if I need to respond to that. That's my point. It's funny you're saying that, because that's my point. To do the bold things, right? We haven't even begun to do what needs to be done according to Nelson Next.
Yeah, I know.
You don't you got to preserve political capital to do those things. We haven't even begun to ask the community to come along with us on hard
not?
things. Well, relative to what we have in front of us, because you can't, I would argue, you can't just sort of block off the money and say, okay, we're going to do a 7% tax increase on the future idea that we're going to need to spend it. You come with the plans first. So we do the strat plan, as Councillor Page says. We lay out, this is the vision for the next 5 years. Then the money and all of the work needs to be done based on that plan. And it's going to be painful. And so if we can sort of preserve while we can some goodwill, we're going to spend that goodwill pretty hard, I imagine, in the next couple of years.
I think we spent a bit today.
We spent some goodwill today?
I think so. Don't you guys feel that?
No.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, we'll see in the
I'm
newspaper
actually
tomorrow.
a little bit lost in your argument, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I just want to say that, you know what happens the first, like, this is always the hardest budget, because one thing is you're coming in and, strategic plans get massaged, they don't get reinvented, but you're coming in on the strategic plan of the previous council,
I got that.
right? Which did have the ideals of Nelson Next and our climate. Like, it wasn't like that just started on the day you got elected and now we have Nelson Next. I mean, but it's just the fact that that was the beginning of that. And I think that the first budget is always the most difficult. And at this point, as much as it sounds a bit cliche, is that we kind of have to, I believe, hold the status quo because we have other things to do and we have more time now. Now the finance team kind of knows what this council kind of likes to think about. And it's going to formulate how we go forward for the next budgets. But you kind of are coming in on the previous council strategic plan. We can't stop. The city doesn't care which 7 of us sit around here. I mean, the city in terms of the sort of organization, doesn't care who's around the table. It's still gotta pay the bills and keep moving forward. But I think that we have now, once we get past this first one, we have more time. We'll have some tweaks and changes to the strategic plan that will sort of look at where things have to be spent. And if we need to make a bold move that says that we increase the taxes X for operations plus 2 for Nelson Next, for short of something to pull out of the air to say what we're going to give 2% to, that will be clearer. That path will be clearer when we repeat this in the fall of 2023 and early January of 2024. So right now it's kind of like you got to kind of do a bit in good faith here right
And I
now.
also want to, there is a lot in this plan around Nelson Next. We have 5 people in a town of 12,000 people in our climate and energy team. We have the food cycler in here, organics diversion in here. We have wildfire mitigation work in here with a new staff member in that EM program. There is a lot in here moving that work forward. We, I would say we're, probably the top of, we're one of the leaders in this whole province. Are we, where we necessarily need to go, but we at least have the staff that are getting those grants, that are coming in, that is advancing that work. Go talk to your neighbors. Well, you'll be at AKBLG. There is a lot that I think you can be proud of that you have, that's included in that 5.8%. So we can certainly identify that when we at the plans, etc., because there's a lot in here for that work, and we're doing that within that 2.2% that you've are targeting here. So I think you should feel really good about what you've been able to make happen in this budget.
So I have to really
Yeah.
keep going, so
Yep,
are we?
we're done.
Okay.
Oh, so I know, notice of motions, seeing none. Late items, we already dealt with the late item. We don't usually do council reports in special meetings, and therefore resolution to adjourn. We have Page, we have Woodward, all those in favor. That's a unanimous, and we're out of here.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.